far wing, shot, score. Well, Mom said you're going to have days like this. And sometimes you just want to pull the covers back up over your head and unplug the alarm clock. 6-1 Detroit.
To me, it's a 6-1 game. You're down by 5 goals in the third period. You did not like the way Thomas and Kyrou played. You don't like some of the decisions of Kasperi Kapanen. You really have nothing to lose. He keeps Kyrou and Thomas at a very high standard, which is what you want if you're Thomas and Kyrou. You want it if you're Doug Armstrong. You want it if you're a Blues fan. You want it if you're any player.
I officially jumped on the Blues bandwagon on Friday, February the 16th. And on that date, the Blues were 29, 22, and 2. They were coming off of a 6-3 win against Edmonton, and hot damn, you couldn't have felt any better about the vibe surrounding this team. The top line was playing like a top line. The secondary scoring was there. The goaltending was fantastic. The coach looked like he was going to get the interim tag stripped from him and just become the new head coach of your St. Louis Blues. Hot damn, we're going to the playoffs, baby. Forget selling. This team is a buy.
Stock's going up. Get that money.
Since then, they've lost 3 out of 4. They've been completely outplayed in those 3 games. They've been outscored so far in their last 4 games, 15-8. The 5-on-5 has looked every bit as bad as it did previously. Binnington even didn't have a great game over the weekend. That wasn't on him. I am certainly not going to blame him. But everybody looked bad on the ice, not named Zack Bolduc, against the Detroit Red Wings. It sure looked to me like they just didn't wake up for this one. It becomes once again a conversation we're having where the schedule has played into their issues. Yes, the early games appear to be a problem for your St. Louis Blues, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what it looked like over the weekend. I'm not telling you that I BKO'd the Blues, but I'm also not completely writing off the possibility. Alex, what'd you make of that loss?
One thing's for sure, though, BK, and you would agree with this, the travel really stunted their game against Detroit.
Yeah, the travel and the early wake-up, no doubt.
You had to get there, play an 11 a.m. game, St. Louis time. That time zone change when you get to Detroit, Michigan.
President's Day, that was a problem for them as well.
Sometimes that kind of stuff jacks you up. And look what happened. You weren't ready to play. Joey somebody texted in because Joe was with me on pregame, and he said that he rode the elevator with Pavel Buchnevich, and Joey joked that he could only understand about 3 words from Buch, but he did understand that, they were a little tired waking up early. And you probably should have known that's what was going to take place. Look, that's a bad look.
They hadn't played in 3 days, and the previous game, they looked like one of the best teams in the NHL. But yeah, no, for sure, it's a definite... Sometimes it's hard to wake up and be ready to go by, checks notes, 11 a.m.
Well, that's a significant time zone change, too, when you go from the Midwest to the Mid-East.
Yeah, I'm sure they just got there on Saturday.
Anyway, that looks bad. That looks so bad for the Blues because you've laid duds and then played well. Like, this goes all the way back to when you came home after that butt whooping by the Detroit Maple Leafs the first time, where Bobby McMahon outplayed your entire team. You come home and you look like a serious team that could make the playoffs by just shellacking Connor McDavid and Edmonton. And then you laid back-to-back eggs against Nashville and Toronto. You look like a dominant team, top line specifically against the Islanders, and then you do what you did against the Detroit Red Wings. And you should have known that this one was going to go bad the first 30 seconds when Patrick Kane, who was on a shift, he was on the ice as his shift ended, and he got the puck behind both Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou and outskated both of those players to get into the blue zone all by himself and take a quick wrist shot. At that point, BK, I looked over at Grant, who was running the board for us, and I said, that is a top-line disaster. And then from that moment, Drew Bannister started shaking the entire thing up. That you can look at Binnington and say, yeah, he got pulled in the first period. You can look at the defense and say, they got outplayed. That was a sole top line looking terrible.
I mean, it was everybody. I'm not going to only blame them. They are the ones that we will point to because they're the best players, and they have to perform well for this team to work. But nobody played well ever. Matt Kessel had a terrible game. He's been really good for this team. But I'm not going to blame Matt Kessel. Matt Kessel's not expected to be one of the best players in the NHL. Who is expected to be that is Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas.
That's my point. Everybody had a bad game. Absolutely. But when your top players show up like that, nobody else is going to perform with this. And this is just a bad look. I mean, Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou played one shift in the third period. It's a bad look on both of them. You can call it a one-off for Robert Thomas. It's an even worse look for Jordan Kyrou because you got not benched, but you dropped through a line every single period in that Nashville Predators game. Then you play a game where you were the best player on the ice, and everybody acknowledged it. And then you follow it up with that, where you don't get a shot on goal. and you get benched in the third period.
So that was the story of the night, or morning, afternoon, whatever you want to call it, for the St. Louis Blues, where Kyrou, Thomas, and Kapanen each took basically one shift in the third period. I think Kapanen technically took no shifts
did not play in the third
period. But Kyrou and Thomas each took one. They finished Thomas with 12 minutes of ice time. He did not get a shot attempt. Kyrou played 10:35 in the game. Missed the only shot attempts that he had in the game. Did not have a shot on goal. Kapanen played 8:45. So after the game, Drew Bannister was asked about benching Thomas and Kyrou. Here's what he had to say.
They're not the only players. We had a large group of players, obviously, that didn't show up when you get beat 6-1 on the road. We'll address it within the room and we'll move forward on it. But as a group, we have to be better.
Here's Braden Shen, your captain, talking about the two biggest stars on the team getting benched in that game.
That's between Banny, Robbie, and Ruzi, so I don't need to comment.
There you go. Not going to comment on it. Keep it in-house. Totally fair. We're not going to do the same. Alex, this is embarrassing. Mm-hmm. And this is why I have been the biggest Jordan Kyrou advocate, I would say, probably at the station, honestly. I have written off some of the negatives as he's young. It's going to take time. Maybe he didn't click with the old coach. Give him the time that we gave to Robert Thomas. Give him the same grace that we gave to Robert Thomas. I know that Robert Thomas was also benched in this game. This was an outlier performance for him this season. He's been excellent for the vast majority of the season. He's raised his game in every aspect. I cannot say the same about Jordan Kyrou. Jordan Kyrou looks like a guy right now that is resting on the laurels of having 37 goals a year ago. He looks like a guy that said, you know what? I am every bit as good as the contracts that they've handed out to me. And the truth is he hasn't been. He hasn't been the same player that he was even last year, where yes, there were some clear deficiencies within his game, but I can point to the scoreboard and say 37 goals. Mm-hmm. And it's a fair retort, even if frustrating, a fair retort. This season, you look at him, he has had far too many games where he is a net negative on the ice. Not a net neutral, a net negative. And when you're paid $8 million, when you're considered to be one of the rising stars in the NHL, that cannot be something that I say about you. And if it is, then we've got to have some serious conversations about, is this guy going to be able to take that next step? Is it going to click for him? I asked last week when we had Jeremy Rutherford on the show, do you think there's something similar to what we saw early in David Perron's career, who we saw over the weekend, where David Perron came in and it was the white shoes, it was the whole narrative around him that, hey, he's just not going to get it here. He started to show some signs before he went elsewhere, but then when he went elsewhere, he had a couple of different stints on the road. It was like, oh man, it's clicked for David Perron. I asked him, do you think that's there for Jordan Kyrou? And he essentially said, without actually saying it, no. I'm not sure that he has that same mentality that we saw even early in David Perron's career. And if that's the case, the Blues got to get out from under this earlier than what they previously would have expected. You got the no trade clause that kicks in next year. At this point, if I'm in Doug Armstrong's shoes, and I'm not, thank God, I would have this team over budget and under delivering on everything. But if I'm in Doug Armstrong's shoes, I would be starting to have serious conversations about what does a trade look like? What can we get in return if we were to make Jordan Kyrou available either at the trade deadline or certainly by the offseason?
You remember, I think it was about
I hate that we're having this conversation.
I do too.
Man. It kills me.
But you remember about a month ago when I asked you and T-Bone and I said, dude, can this team win with Jordan Kyrou? And we all said, yeah, you can win, but you have to have a ton of players surrounding that player to hide his deficiencies. And I looked this up prior to that Saturday game, and we talked about it on pregame. Robert Thomas this season has had 18 games where he has had 2 or more points. He has had 17, although that is now 18 games in that game against Detroit. He's had 18 games where he has gone without a point. So in as many games as he has had 0 points, he has also had 2 or more points, which half of the season he's come away with at least a point. Jordan Kyrou has had 28 games this season in 57 total games where he has gone without a point. That's almost half the season. Pavel Buchnevich, 29 games this season where he has gone without a point. And you might say, well, what about when they score 2 or more points? There's been 12 of them with Jordan Kyrou and 14 of them with Pavel Buchnevich. Almost half of your season with 2 of the players that are on the top line. And one of them you have to start discussing, do we want to pay him $8 million? 2 of those players, half of the season, are held pointless. And I understand it's a lot to ask players to have points per game. But that's what you do when you pay somebody $8, $9, $10 million. are they impactful at least every night?
And even if you're not impactful, like if he's getting no points in some of these games, so be it. It is what it is. But you can't be a net negative when you're on the ice. That's the problem with Kyrou, is when he's not registering points, he's turning the puck over and it's going the other direction and it's ending up in his own net. And I've been somebody, once again, that will say early on in his career, really up until this season, hey, the rush stuff doesn't really bother me all that much because you need some of that. Like, it's good for you to have somebody that can be a bit of a change of pace with the way that they win. That line exclusively plays off of the rush right now. Like, they're getting zero net front presence. They're getting no cycle game going. They do nothing other than, hey, we're going to skate through the neutral zone, put a puck on the net, and then it's coming back the other direction. It's just not a way to win hockey games. It's not, man. And I thought at some point we would start to get to the point where they develop more of a well-diversified game. They haven't done that. And in fact, in some ways, I think they've regressed. I think that line has gone from where it was a year ago, where there were times where I thought, and we looked up the numbers, it was one of the better lines in the NHL, to being a line where when they're on, I think they're front runners. When they're on, they play really well. When they're not on, though, dude, it is ugly. It's like watching the Dallas Cowboys out there. When it looks good, woo-hoo-hoo, we're going to be toe picking. We're doing everything we can. Drop passes are starting to get into the right spots. We're going to go right into the slot with this chance. Like, everything looks real great. When they are not on, though, it is ugly. And on Saturday morning, that was one of the worst performances that I've seen from that line all season. Drew Bannister clearly saw the same thing. And by the end of that game, everybody knew what was coming. They didn't deserve to be on the ice in the third period. Yeah, I know it was 6-1. It's easy to do that in that game. But it was also the right thing to do in that game. I'm curious to see what the lines look like whenever they're back on the ice.
We have them right now. Matt DeFranks is with the team. He's not making any changes. The only change is, Justin Falk is skating with the line, so looks like Falk might be in. And this is the part that I'm amazed. I know Kessel had a bad game, but Kessel's the one out. But this is my issue. And in the game against Detroit, he was juggling up the lines, Drew Bannister nonstop. I mean, we saw Jake Neighbors move up to the top line. We saw Booch drop down. Wow. He was trying to find anything. He's not making any changes to those line combinations. And as much as
I'm shocked by that.
I am too. But as much as I've liked what Bannister has done with this team, like, let's also not fool ourselves. The 5-on-5 play has not been any different, and you can hold the players accountable in one game, but what does it matter when you're putting them right back out there in the same situation, being the top line, when you have a game like that?
I mean, I guarantee, and I will be curious to see what Drew Bannister has to say after the game, but my assumption, I shouldn't say I guarantee, my assumption would be he told them, listen, we're ride or die with you guys. And in that game, that was an embarrassing performance. And unless you guys get it together, this team cannot make the playoffs. Because that's the truth. This team can't make the playoffs if those three players do not perform at a higher level than what they were at in that game, and then certainly what they were at in the two performances against Toronto as well. We're putting you back together. If it doesn't get any better, not only are you not going to be together anymore on that line, you're not going to be together on this team any longer, because they're going to have to make changes. Like that is what's at stake right now. So if that is the message that's being sent, it's obviously not being sent directly to fans by them being put back together, but being sent directly to the players. I guess I understand it to a degree. I would have liked to have seen a change there. I would have liked to see Thomas with Neighbors and maybe even like a Bolduc on that line.
I mean, you reward players, and I thought Bolduc played well, but here's my thing with it. Like, you could do this, and Bannister has done this 2 separate times this season with Pavel Buchnevich following the Tampa Bay Lightning loss, and then that Nashville Predators game against Nashville with Kyrou. And Kyrou responded for that Islanders game, but then we got right back to this spot. Now, Robert Thomas, that was a blip on the radar. Robert Thomas, of course, you expect him to turn that around. Pavel Buchnevich, we've seen turn that around. We talked about it on Friday. So all comes back to Jordan Kyrou. And I hate that we're putting so much pressure on him, but that line only goes as far as Jordan Kyrou is going to carry them. And you saw what it looks like when he's not engaged in the game.
Well, and that's the big thing, too, is like in the past, we've seen Jordan Kyrou at least go on stretches where he'll put it together and
for
he
a good
will
week.
Yeah, he'll go on stretches where he'll score consistently. But right now, it's a game-by-game basis, and more often than not, it's not looking good for him. And that's why, and I've been saying this all season, and I like Jordan Kyrou, and I want to see him do well here. But there comes a point in time, I mean, he's almost 26 years old at this point. And there's a reason why, if you're Doug Armstrong, you negotiated a delayed no-trade clause into that contract rather than just give it to him immediately. You're looking at it and you're saying, okay, I need to see this over the next couple of years to sell me on this player 100%. I mean, if you're Doug Armstrong looking at where Jordan Kyrou is right now from the expectations of when he signed that contract, what else did you need to see? Like, when you imagine it going bad and potentially needing to use a trade, what else were you imagining other than this?
Yeah, this is it. This is what you were imagining. So, Blues back on the ice this morning. As Alex said, it looks like Justin Falk is taking morning skate with the team. We'll see if that means that he's going to be back with the team in their next game. If so, they would have to activate him from LTIR, and in doing so, they would have to make a roster move of significance. My guess would be, and this is pure guesswork, I'm guessing Sammy Blais would be placed through waivers, and that's the way that they would make the money work along with the roster.
Boy, I hope it's not Bolduc.
I don't think they will. He's played too well.
Agreed, but you know what Curbs always says, roster protection or asset management. He's the one that doesn't have to go through waivers.
You're not losing anything by saying, you know what, it didn't work with Sammy Blais this year. Let's go ahead and go our separate ways. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. T-Bone out today. He's out in Indianapolis. He's having a good time. He's going to, I think, a Pacers game later on this evening. So some much-deserved vacation for our guy T-Bone. I wonder if he knows that he's in Indianapolis at the same time as the NFL Combine. I hope he's aware of that because the traffic over the next few days is probably not going to be what he anticipated. Coming up in about 15 minutes, we're going to talk to our Cardinals insider, Katie Woo, who will be back with us this season throughout the course of the Cardinals season. We'll talk to her about all of the latest from Cardinals camp coming up in 15 minutes. Speaking of the Cardinals, we saw our first real extended look of what the shortstop situation will look like this season, Alex. The starter looks fantastic. Everything behind him, just hope and pray that Mason Wynn stays healthy this year. We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK, and it is time to unlock your inner champion today. You can do so by going to Victory Men's Health or going to victorymenshealth.com. They have 4 locations around the St. Louis area. There are 2 locations, one in O'Fallon, Illinois, one in O'Fallon, Missouri, another in Town and Country, and then a 4th location, which opened up earlier this month in Sunset Hills, Missouri. For the exact locations, go to victorymenshealth.com. You go to them because you want to make yourself into the best version of yourself, whether you want to lose some weight, you want to get some testosterone help, you have an erectile dysfunction issue that you've been dealing with and that you would like to get the right help for, go to victorymenshealth.com for all of that. And if it's easier for you to do this from home instead of going into one of their great 4 locations across the St. Louis region, well, they are now offering telehealth for all of their services. You have to reside in Illinois and Missouri, but if you do, the process is going to be super easy for you. Go to the website, click on the telehealth tab, and from there, pick the service that you're most interested in, whether that's weight loss, hormones, micronutrient testing, and based on the service you're interested in, they will ship that lab draw kit directly to your home, and once the results are in, they'll do a video telehealth consult to review them with you. So go to Victory Men's Health today. That's victorymenshealth.com.
Cardinals really excited about this young 21-year-old shortstop. He's out of Kingwood High School. He is 3 for 3 today. Mason Wynn has 3 of the Cardinals' 6 hits. He is headed to second, and he is going to ease into second base with a double. Wynn having himself a nice start to his spring training.
That's what it sounded like over the weekend. A nice debut in spring training for Mason Wynn. Any of those concerns that we may have had about Mason Wynn, the injury, really not even an injury, him being hurt with the upper body issues, that all kind of went to the wayside over the weekend. That audio courtesy of the Houston Astros broadcast via MLB TV over the weekend with Alex and Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. T-Bone off today. He'll be back in on Wednesday. The good and the bad was on display, though, Alex, about the shortstop situation for the Cardinals over the weekend. The good was, of course, Mason Wynn going 3 for 3 in that game, having not 1 but 2 really impressive plays defensively. That was everything you could have asked for from him, and then some. The bad is basically everybody else that we saw playing shortstop for the Cardinals over the weekend.
Well, who was that, BK?
Here are the players that got opportunities when Mason Wynn wasn't in the game for the Cardinals. This included the split squad on Saturday and then yesterday's game as well. Jose Fermin, Jeremy Rivas, Archimedes Gamboa, and Brody Moore. If some of those players sound like creative players from MLB The Show to you,
they are.
It's because a lot of us aren't too familiar with the last 3 names that I just mentioned there. In other words, Jose Fermin is your true backup shortstop right now. Now, we know Tommy Edman, when healthy, will be the backup shortstop, but it requires him to be healthy. And as of today, we don't know if or when that will take place for Tommy Edman. Alex, I'm growing more and more concerned about this by the day. I don't think this is something that's going to hinder your season as long as Mason Wynn is healthy. But this is putting a lot of faith that Mason Wynn can and will stay healthy for the entirety of the season, because if that were to go wrong, all it means is just one injury to be able to wash everything that you tried to develop away. I genuinely believe need to bring somebody in for this. There are guys that are available that you can go out there and get on a $1-2 million deal. You bring them in as a true backup shortstop, and yes, it probably means not having somebody like Alec Burleson on the roster on opening day. Guess what? Tough luck. That's the way that this roster is constructed right now. I think it's more important to have this player than it is to have somebody like Alec Burleson, despite me being a fan of the guy, because of what you need right now. So I think that it is officially time. I think they probably need to go get that shortstop, especially if this Tommy Edman thing doesn't get corrected soon.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, as much as I like the idea of having an Alec Burleson and having that big back coming off of the bench, I mean, he would be your 5th outfielder that you'd have on your roster, and I'm not sure you need that many outfielders, especially with the utility of certain guys that you can use in certain situations. I am with you. I think you do need to have a veteran shortstop that you can use in that place, so you don't have to move around Tommy Edman, and you have that safety net if something does happen to Mason Wynn. I could tell you the Cardinals probably view this the opposite, where they're like, man, we're fine. We've got Brendan Donovan who could play there in a pinch. We know Tommy Edman can play there.
You don't have anybody that can play there for more than like 2 days in a row.
And I agree with you. I think
including Tommy Edman, who I don't want doing that for, a week period of time, because he's your starting center fielder.
But if it's more than that, they'll go to Jose Fermin, and they'll be like, well, we'll just have to do.
That's also not a real option to me.
I don't think the Cardinals have the option of, well, what happens if X? I think if X happens, we're in a bad spot, and we have to tape it together with sticks and bubble gum.
Yeah.
Especially Thomas Ajaysi, who's been working at the position at spring training,
and is also not a natural shortstop. He's a second baseman or a third baseman, more of a second baseman than a third at this point in his career. And that's fine. We just don't need... We keep doing this thing where it's like, hey, could we make so-and-so into a more valuable premium position? And I understand why they do it. If Thomas Ajaysi is capable of starting a game for you at shortstop over the course of a week, man, that adds real value for him on your major league roster. Brendan Donovan, I think if you need to start him here or there throughout the season at shortstop instead of moving Tommy Edman from center field to short, you could probably get away with that occasionally. I absolutely do not want him starting an extended period of time for you at shortstop, though. And the same thing would be true about Tommy Edman for me, because he's your, supposedly, starting center fielder going into the season. This is a team that they do this in every aspect of the team sometimes, where it's like, okay, we're going to build this thing where if this piece gets pulled out of the Jenga board, everything topples over immediately. Defensively, we have talked about how important it is for this team to take a step this year, right? A big part of that is Mason Wynn starting at shortstop and Tommy Edman starting in center field. If you don't have those two pieces there, what you have tried to construct all kind of falls apart because you don't have a backup at shortstop, and so you're going to pull Tommy Edman from center to the shortstop position. You could go out there right now, man, right now, and go sign one of the veteran shortstops that are available. It costs you almost nothing, and all you've got to do is go give them a couple $1,000,000 to be able to give you at worst an insurance policy.
Well, and create a roster space with the Cardinals think that's like moving the mountains.
Sure, but the 40-man roster is not hard to manipulate right now. You've got plenty of room on that roster if you want to go out and make a move like this. And the 26-man roster, we'll see what happens when we get there. If that guy comes in and you get into opening day and it's like, hey, we don't need that player because Tommy Edman is fully healthy and Mason Wynn is ready to go. We're totally fine with what we have available. All right, fine, then cut him. Cut him. It's $1,000,000, $2,000,000 that you had as an insurance policy for your guys, and you didn't end up needing to use it. Break glass in case of emergency, it didn't break, so you go ahead and either trade him away or send him through waivers or whatever. But that is something that I believe at this point in time is more than worthy of discussion for the Cardinals. And I think you're right, Alex. I don't think they're even looking at it. I think they're saying, we're fine here. Mm-hmm. No need for us to do anything.
And I think they view it, too, as if something does happen and he's out an extended time, well, then we'll just go to the market and we'll sign somebody to come in and fill that spot.
And that guy's not going to be there. Yeah. A month from now, these players that we're talking about that are currently available will be scooped up by somebody. Mm-hmm. And that's the frustration.
Yeah. It feels like the Cardinals believe they have this magic power to create shortstops out of second baseman or utility guys or create center fielders out of corner outfielders that other people don't have. And in the past, it's worked. But now you're starting to get to the point where it fizzles out quick. And what they view as, well, shoulder shrug, if that happens, we'll have to figure it out until the guy's back for us. Figuring it out means you could be 10 games out of a top spot in the Central Division and finding your way fighting in May.
For a team that talks so much about how important the first month of the season is, they sure don't seem to be acting like a team that's got a whole lot of urgency for the first month of the season. He's Alex, that's great. I'm BK. Katie Wu, Cardinals insider for The Athletic. I want to ask her about this. She also had a great piece earlier today about what Wilson Contreras is doing to improve his defense behind the plate. We'll get to all of that with Katie coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. A disappointing one for the Blues over the weekend on Saturday, losing 6-1 in Detroit. They got swept by the Red Wings in that 2-game season series. Blues now fall behind Nashville by 4 points in the Western Conference standings, now 4 points out of that final wild card spot. They'll look to turn it around and stay on the road tomorrow as they head to Winnipeg. Pregame will be at 6 o'clock and puck drop at 7 here on your home for the Blues, 101 ESPN. And for St. Louis City SC over the weekend, they opened up their MLS regular season play. They played to a draw against Real Salt Lake. They'll be back in action tomorrow as they take on Houston in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I'm Grant France with the SportsCenter Update's been driven by Johnny Londoff. Find your roads and shop 24/7 at londoff.com and londoffautoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
Alex, we've got a rarity today in our Cardinals spring training beat report coming from Katie Wu live down in Jupiter.
Yeah?
It's going to be warmer today here in St. Louis than it is down in Jupiter, Florida, which is something I was unprepared to say at the end of February.
But don't feel bad, though, Katie, because from what I understand, Tuesday night going into Wednesday, we're expecting snow flurries.
Yes,
and I would imagine in between that, we're probably going to get tornadoes.
That's all right. We didn't have to mention that part. I was just going to try to make her feel bad about the fact that it's beautiful here in St. Louis for a couple of days.
You push her down like you do, and I build her back up.
Katie Wu joining us now here on the show. Katie, how's it going down there in Jupiter?
Oh, boys, we are so back, aren't we?
We sure are.
How was the mac and cheese, more importantly, Katie?
Well, I have about half of it left because, responsible as always, I was not in a position to take a radio call. But we rally, we persevere, and here we are, happy to break down some early sights of spring training.
Katie, are you back in the Jupiter bathroom again?
I'm in the Jupiter staircase, which is it's a bit of an upgrade, but not by much.
All right. So we've had so far from Katie. Well, I want you to do a different place for your radio hit while you're down in Jupiter.
Yeah.
Every time that we call in, we'll just get a new spot. We'll do some vibe checks from you down in Jupiter. Okay.
Okay, Julian, you guys can let me know the sounds, the acoustics, what sounds best, where I can improve. Lots of places in Roger Dean Stadium to do radio, apparently.
Well, right now, A+, so you need to find a way to up this.
All right, Katie was our Cardinals insider. She's back for 2024 with us. You can find her great work over at The Athletic and, of course, each and every Monday right here on BK and Ferrario. Katie, let's start with looking back at what we saw from the Cardinals over the weekend. I would say Mason Wynn was probably my headliner coming out of the game on Saturday. What have you seen from him early in spring in the returns of the guy that they've kind of just handed over their starting shortstop job to?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I can't recall the last time a Cardinals rookie came into camp and they had more or less handed over the reins to the opening job at any position. And, Mason's going to have to go out there and prove it with his bat a little bit, but especially with the uncertainty with Tommy Edman's injury and recovery from surgery, it seems like this is Mason's job to lose. And he had a great first impression yesterday. 3 for 3, 3 hard hit balls. Unfortunately, we don't have StatCast out in Palm Beach, but the ear test, everything sounded good. The range was there, of course, and it's always a little bit concerning when you're dealing with kind of the tightness and aches when it's a position as big a shortstop. But this early in the spring didn't really seem like a big deal. You don't want to push guys in the second week of spring training. So it was just really good to see Mason go out there and be able to play with no inhibitions and be able to do exactly what he'd advertised in terms of what he was working on over the spring, which was finding a way to hit the ball hard and get on base consistently. Mason Wynn, all he has to do is get to first, and you have basically an extra 90 feet if he's able to take any kind of look at a stolen base there. So just good things to see all around for Mason Wynn's inaugural spring training game.
Katie, I apologize for the way that I am, but I do kind of always look at it and say, worst case scenario, what is your plan here? And I know it's been a heated kind of conversation of, look, if Tommy Edman's not ready and Mason Wynn is fighting for that roster spot, what's plan B in certain situations for center field and shortstop?
Yeah, that's a very fair question, and arguably the biggest question coming into camp, because everything else, minus the last 3 spots in the bullpen, seems pretty set in stone. Right now, it's just way too early to see if Tommy Edman's going to be cleared for opening day. We probably won't have an actual best estimate until midway through the spring at least. You're looking at Mason, and if obviously he has a game like he did on Sunday every day, we're not too worried about it. But the biggest thing the Cardinals were worried about coming into spring was if Mason struggles, what do they do at shortstop? Right now, while they would obviously prefer to have Tommy Edman, their worst-case scenario isn't a worst-case scenario at all, really. You have Dylan Carlson, a more than capable defensive outfielder in all three positions, to take over in center field. We know what Dylan looks like in center. We know that he's, an above-average outfielder. Now it's just a matter of can he hit the ball consistently. Totally understand that, but that to me is not a huge concern in terms of outfield. Shortstop, I'd like to see a little bit better depth. You'd probably feel better about Donovan coming into shortstop and playing an emergency if he wasn't also coming off a surgery of his own. Jose Fermin can do it, but that certainly won't be your everyday look. So, yeah, if Mason Wynn starts to struggle, then I think the Cardinals have that conversation about do they need to go look and sign someone, a veteran guy off the bench to bring in an infield at a shortstop. But right now, I think they're giving Mason as much opportunity as possible and hoping he takes off and runs with the opportunity.
Katie, it looked like Riley O'Brien had quite the appearance over the weekend. 13 pitches, 11 of them in for strikes. His fastball was right in the 98 miles per hour range. He would be somebody that I would throw into this category. But for you, who's the pitcher, and you can take this in any direction, that has stood out to you most from what you saw in their bullpens to what we've seen so far early in spring training?
Good question. Riley O'Brien was definitely the pitcher that most catchers and staff members were talking to me about during lives and side sessions. He actually threw at the split squad game I was not in attendance for, so didn't get to see him in action, but the reviews I heard from him after were very positive. I thought Tank Pence had a pretty encouraging outing yesterday, just in terms of how he was able to get himself out of a bases-loaded jam. Sometimes it's good for guys to struggle because it allows everyone to see how they can get out of it. And that to me is just as important as going out there and dominating. But in terms of pitchers that are going to impact the staff, I am excited to see what Giovanni Gallegos looks like in 2024. This is a guy that's taken the ball the most amount since 2021. Any reliever you can consider on the Cardinals roster had a down year in 2023 and arguably his worst year as a Cardinal. But he is an instrumental part in the back end of this bullpen. And throughout the organization, people have been very, very high on him. His teammates have been saying, Gio came into camp looking good, looking strong. He definitely looks to be down a few pounds. So I'm excited to see what Gio does, and he'll actually pitch it in today as well.
Katie, how did you feel about Matthew Liberatore's first outing?
It's tough to judge pitchers on their first couple of spring outings. I think Libby came into spring with good velo on his fastball. And now it's about finding consistency and landing his breaking ball pitches, which I don't think he was able to do quite to his liking on Saturday. But they're going to give Matthew Liberatore a lot of runway, same with Zach Thompson. We know there's not a lot of depth in AAA in terms of starting pitching, and we also know, just based on the history of the game, that all 5 starters projected in the rotation are not going to make all 32 starts. You need some depth there in AAA. So for Libby and for Thompson, too, it's about consistency. Can they be consistent with their fastball? Can they vary up the speeds but still locate the pitches? Can they land their secondary? I don't think Libby was super excited about being able to control his secondary pitches on Saturday. It's certainly something that he would like to improve coming into it. But it's really hard to evaluate these young pitchers just after a couple of outings. So I'd like to see a little bit more of Matthew Liberatore before I make a full decision.
We're talking to Katie Woo, Cardinals insider for The Athletic and 101 ESPN. You'll hear her on BK and Ferrario throughout the Cardinals baseball season, and be sure to follow her on Twitter if you don't already, at Katie J. Woo. Katie, I love Victor Scott. Everything about him. He is a man that is made like in a lab for what I like in a baseball player. I like defense in center field. I like speed on the bases. That guy has all of that in spades. Is there anything in your mind that he can do in spring training or even early in the regular season that would push the Cardinals to bring him up to the big league club? Or is this just a year of development and we'll kind of see him later on?
I think the way that the Cardinals are bringing Victor Scott up, especially this spring, is very similar to what they did with Mason Wynn. And we actually had this conversation with Ollie Marmol a couple of days ago, that this spring can kind of be a platform for Victor Scott like it was for Mason Wynn at this point last year. He's going to get a lot of opportunities out in the outfield, especially with Tommy Edman down. So we're going to see him a lot. You're going to see that speed. You're going to see that defense. He impacted that split squad game on Saturday, the game that I was not there for, again, incredibly. And I think it was just a full overall, all the dimensions of Victor Scott as a player were taken into consideration during that game. But what's going to be the most important for Victor Scott in this early part of 2024 is the reps and seeing how he responds to adversity, seeing how he responds to struggle. We saw that with Mason pretty much all spring. He took off last year, worked his way through AAA, the ups and downs, and eventually got a call-up in mid-August. I could see Victor Scott doing that same trajectory, but it all kind of just depends on how he plays. I'm assuming he'll start in AAA this year, but there's a reason the Cardinals are so high on him and are giving him so much of an opportunity this spring. I do think they kind of want to mirror that path that they did for Mason last year to Victor this year.
Katie, final one from me, and I know it's a hot topic around Major League Baseball with 2 starting pitchers still available, Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell. Do you believe or have you heard any inklings of the Cardinals at least exploring those 2 names?
I have not. And I know you're probably, people listening are going to groan, but I think at this point the Cardinals have been pretty consistent with their messaging about how they feel about the starting pitching market. They had not been linked to Blake Snell since the first day of the offseason. I don't see that changing now. And at this point, I think they feel pretty confident about their starting pitching just kind of in droves. We know what the projected rotation is going to be. We also know that they're going to give Libby and Zach Thompson as many chances as possible to prove themselves. It just doesn't seem like a Cardinal thing to do at the moment. You can certainly make the argument on why it should be, but at this point in time, it does not sound like the Cardinals are really going to be active in that starting pitching market.
All right, Katie, I went over to The Athletic earlier today, and I was happy to see there was a piece by Katie Wu on what Wilson Contreras has done this offseason and what he is planning to do during the spring in order to improve his pitch framing in 2024. For those that have not read it yet, give us a little glimpse into what you were able to write about, what you were able to find out about what he's doing in that regard.
Yes, it is proof that I actually have been working here in Jupiter, and I've not just been going to the beach. So if my bosses are listening, I have been working, I promise. I thought it was really interesting to hear what Wilson had to say about his own framing techniques and also what the Cardinals had to say in terms of where he was really struggling. When you look at Wilson's change from the traditional crouch behind the plate to the one knee down stance that he's now incorporating, that kind of took place more in the second half of the season. But it is really hard to make that full change and buy into it halfway through the year. So the Cardinals were very honest with Contreras about the fundamental changes they needed to see happen. He needs to be better framing in the bottom of the zone. Major League Baseball and Baseball Savant, all the analytics there, divide framing into 8 zones called shadow zones around the plate. Wilson was the most ineffective on pitches below the knees, low strike zone. He was not getting virtually any called strikes there. And that seems to be, especially when you think about the Cardinals' overall rotation and their pitching staff, any strike that Wilson Contreras can steal is beneficial. So by going to the one knee down approach, the Cardinals believe that it'll help him both with framing the low pitches as he's able to receive from the ground up instead of stabbing at it to going up to down, and also should help receiving. It allows Wilson to get better targets for his pitchers, and hopefully, again, because he's able to work from the ground up and not stab at it, the framing will improve as well. So I thought it was interesting to kind of dive into the metrics there. And certainly we'll see that more consistently. Wilson's expected to catch Sonny Gray's Grapefruit League debut tomorrow.
That's interesting. This is the kind of stuff that is actually important from spring. The numbers I kind of just toss off to the side, but like last year, Nolan Gorman looked more spry in the infield. He looks like he was better defensively. Stuff like this where you see an actual change from a player, maybe a batting stance change. Those kinds of things can be telling for what we're going to see during the regular season. So that's certainly something worth monitoring. Katie, we appreciate the time as always. Enjoy yourself at the Cardinals game today, a game that is not televised, unfortunately, for us here in St. Louis. I'll be looking forward to your coverage. We'll talk with you again soon, my friend.
Go warm up that mac and cheese.
I know, seriously. You got it, guys. I'm looking forward to spending another season with you all.
Absolutely. That's Katie Wu, one of the best, certainly one of our favorites here on BK and Ferrario. As I mentioned earlier, Alex, she's officially going to be back with us for the 2024 season. So I'm looking forward to having Katie on regularly with us. That bit that she had on Wilson Contreras is really interesting, man. It was one of the most frustrating parts of the early portion of the 2023 season was the way that Wilson Contreras was handled behind the plate. It felt like they were trying to make him into Yadier Molina when he was never going to be Yadier Molina. If he can improve a bit, though, on pitch framing, pitch calling, all of these different things, that is something that will help the Cardinals heading into 2024, no doubt about it.
I think it's going to help him, too, having a lot of pitchers that don't rely solely on the catcher to carry them through a game. I think Sonny Gray is going to be a guy that can carry Wilson Contreras through the game. I think the same can be said about a Lynn, a Gibson, a Miles Michaelis. And if you think about it, that's really what Wilson Contreras had for the majority of his career in Chicago. He had
Veteran
Arrieta, Yu Darvish. He had a lot of veteran pitchers that told him what they were doing. And I think that's where you're going to get the best out of Wilson Contreras.
They're there. They're there in spring training, so they're going to be able to get on the same page as opposed to last year where, as we know, everything was kind of thrown off by the WBC. Katie Woo's work, of course, is over at The Athletic. You can give her a follow on Twitter at Katie J. Woo. He's Alex. That's great. I'm BK. Coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Questions and answers here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my dentist, 100 West Dental off of Manchester. Brand new office, and Dr. Pryor and his team have taken the anxiety away from going to the dentist. And if you're like me, sometimes you think, I don't really want to go to the dentist. You're not sure how it's going to go, especially if you are like me, you had a dentist that really didn't care about the overall health of you and your mouth. That's changed with 100 West Dental, because as soon as I sit in that chair, patient experience is the most important part for Dr. Pryor and his team, and it's a specific approach to dentistry. It's called preventative procedure. And what I mean by that is they're not having you open your mouth and saying, nope, no cavity, see you in 6 months. No, they're making sure that the gums are healthy, the teeth are healthy, the strength of your teeth are there, your tongue is healthy. All of those are integral in terms of your overall oral health. So make sure you get with the right dentist. Check them out online, 100westdental.com. You can schedule online. You can even do an online consultation with Dr. Pryor before you even step into the door. 100westdental.com. Get with the best at 100 West.
You've got questions. We may have the answers. Maybe it's BK and Ferrario's questions and answers on 101 ESPN.
Driven by Offenburg Kia in the St. Clair Auto Mall in Shiloh off I-64.
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. You guys can get your questions in over there, or you can watch us on YouTube at youtube.com/101ESPN-STL. The Graveyard is the chat that's up and running over there.
It's lively, too.
As well. It sure is. People are dying to get in. From the 618. Guys, what do you think would need to happen for Victor Scott to make the big leagues out of spring training? I'll get started on this one, Alex. I think the first thing that would need to happen is Tommy Edman is not ready to go by opening day. If that takes place, you suddenly have an extra roster spot that is available for the outfield. And if Victor Scott then shows with Tommy Edman on the sideline, he is a clear upgrade from what they have available to them with Dylan Carlson, that would be his path to making the opening day roster. I still think maybe then there would still need to be more that happens around that, but that's the starting point for it to take place.
Yeah, I think something needs to happen to one of your outfielders. Tommy Edman, Dylan Carlson, I think maybe Lars Nootbaar, one of those three has to be injured for Victor Scott to make it. But then it also comes into his offense. As great as his defense is, I'm not sure the Cardinals, specifically Ali Marmol, are going to be okay with having a win and Victor Scott in the lineup and uncertainty with their offense.
314-399-9646 from the 636. Guys, why do you think it is that Jordan Kyrou just doesn't get it? And saying he's young isn't a fair answer. I want to know why he doesn't seem to understand.
Wow, aggressive. You want us to go into the mind of Jordan Kyrou? I mean, I can't tell you why. I can only speak to what people that work with younger players say. And I'll go back to a quote that Patrick Waugh had prior to that Islanders game. He was talking about Zack Bolduc, and somebody asked him about the defensive side of the game for Zack Bolduc and how much he worked on it. And Patrick Waugh, who is a Hall of Famer, a legend, who is coaching younger players and now back in the NHL, he said, you don't just flip a switch to be good defensively. And he's not talking about being a Selke Trophy candidate. He's talking about being responsible on the other side of the puck. He talked about Zack Bolduc and said, look, if you want offense, you've got to create it yourself. You've got to be physical, but you also have to be very cognizant of what's going on the other side of the ice. And Patrick Waugh said, you work on this when you're a young player, when you're in junior hockey, you do not flip a switch. You either know how to do it or you don't know how to do it. And it's a tough thing to train once you get at the NHL level.
Yeah, we all know people in our own personal lives. Like, I think habits are what they are for a lot of people. And it's hard to build in new habits into your life. Like, maybe at the beginning of the year, you say to yourself, you know what? I want to read 20 books this year. That's my stated goal. And then you go about it and you're like, okay, this is how I go about that. And then you get into your daily life and man, something comes up with the kids. And then the next day you've got something work that's taking you elsewhere. And it's not a priority for you. And so suddenly you get into the month of June and you've read one book so far this year. It wasn't actually a priority for you. You just said, I want to read more books. And so I think that happens in hockey or in any other piece of your life as well, where for Jordan Kyrou, I do genuinely believe in the offseason he said to himself, I've got to have a better full 200-foot game. I've got to be better on pucks. I've got to win puck battles, all of these different things. I think he wanted to care about it. But then you get onto the ice, the game starts moving, everything is flying at 100 miles an hour, and suddenly you just revert back to what you've always been as a player. And for Jordan Kyrou, it's a pure goal scorer that floats in and out of games. And I don't know that that's going to change for him, man. I think a lot of these guys, they are who they are as players. You can develop within that skill set. There's a ceiling, there's a floor of what you can be in the NHL, depending on situation, depending on talent, depending on a lot of different coaching, a lot of different things, opportunity. But for Jordan Kyrou, I think this just is who he is.
I mean, I know people don't like the plus-minus stat because it can be used for you and against you. But, it's pretty obvious when you're a 94-point scorer or a 109-point scorer and you're a +5 and a +26. Like, being a +26 and 109 total points, that tells you something. That you're a guy who can score a lot of goals, a lot of points, but you're not going to be good on the other side of the ice. And that's fine. Like, you've comped him to Alex DeBrincat, BK, and I think it's a great comp. But Alex DeBrincat, although he's a +3 with 52 points this season, has 22 goals and 30 assists. Yeah. If you're going to be that type of player, then consistently, you're going to have to score 25 to 35 goals.
Yeah, I think he's on that scale, right? There's a bunch of different players that are somewhere on that scale of the best version of it is somebody like a DeBrincat. The worst version of it is somebody like a Jakub Vrana, where within that scale, that sliding system, there's a lot of different potential places where you can land. And I think Jordan Kyrou, I thought he was going to get closer to what we saw from DeBrincat over the weekend. And you saw that shot, man. Like, that guy is super talented. But it's frustrating because there are games where he doesn't show up, and then it becomes a liability defensively for you.
And Ottawa relied on him as their best player. Detroit is using him as a complementary piece.
100%.
He's a complementary piece.
And you can do that, but it requires you to have somebody young or very good that is on that top line that can take their spot, and the Blues don't have that right now.
Well, and to be fair to Jordan Kyrou, like last season he was a -38. This year, right now, he's a -6. So, like, he has improved, but you're improving from terrible to below average.
And
like, it's still not good.
And you're not scoring on the same pace that you were last year.
Yeah, and I think the most frustrating part of all of this is that, you know, you talk about how Patrick Waugh said it's not a switch that you can just flip on and off, but it seems like it is for Jordan Kyrou. Like, he has games where the switch is flipped on, but the majority of the time it's not. I mean, you look at that Dallas game after he had that emotional moment, following the comments that after the Berube firing, and nobody was stopping him in that game because he chose to show up and he was just on his game. The Islanders game, it was sort of the same thing after that Nashville game where he was moved down the lineup, but it's not consistent. Like, something bad has to happen. He has to have a really bad moment or a bad game to bring that out of him, and it's only for one game.
Which is the infuriating part, because you'll see it probably tomorrow against Winnipeg because of what took place, and then you'll lose it the next game.
Again, though, this goes back to habits. I can have a random day where I'm cleaning my house and everything looks great the next day, right? But then if I go back to habits where, like, in my daily life, I don't pick up after myself. The trash, I just leave it on the couch. If I make something for dinner, I just put the dishes into the sink.
Amen to that.
And then for the next 2 weeks, my wife's having to pick up the slack, right? And then maybe I have another day where I'm like, oh my God, I got to be better about this. I can't keep doing this. I got to do the laundry. I got to get it clean. And so, yeah, it's easy for me for that one day to, for the entire day, just spend the day cleaning. But if I don't then, through my daily life, pick up after myself, it doesn't mean I'm somebody that is doing that on a day in, day out basis. It means that I was able to do it once. I'm capable. I'm more than capable of doing it. But it's not a habit for me because I don't put a priority on that being part of my life. Now, I'm the opposite of this. I'm very anal with all of my cleaning, as you guys could probably guess. But that's what we're talking about here with Jordan Kyrou. What does he prioritize? And the truth is, he doesn't prioritize the things that we're talking about here. Let's continue with this conversation on the other side, because Grant said something really interesting in the office earlier today. The Blues made some statements, Doug Armstrong specifically, whenever they fired Craig Berube, about what that decision said about this roster. When we listen back to what he said then, how do we feel about it today? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN. So Doug Armstrong, around the time that Craig Berube was fired, came out and said publicly he was doing this for a very specific reason, Alex. Here's what he had to say at the initial press conference upon deciding that Craig Berube would no longer be the Blues head coach about eliminating at least one variable.
Last night's game against a depleted Detroit team that was tired looked a lot like a depleted Columbus team that was tired and a depleted Chicago team, and there just wasn't a feeling there was something that was going to change today if we just came in and went back to work that would make tomorrow different. Now, I don't know if tomorrow is going to be different. I just know one of the things that has been removed from the equation, it was the head coach, and now, we're getting now to the center of the hourglass.
Alex, for a while, the Blues had done a good job of not having these just absolute stinkers of a game under Drew Bannister. There were a couple early on where it was the game against, Tampa Bay, and then I think Florida as well, where you just did not play well in those two. But since then, you've done a pretty good job of not going down by 2, 3, 4 goals over the course of a game. Well, recently, you lose 4-1 in Toronto, 5-2 against Nashville, 4-2 at home against Toronto. That game wasn't as close as the score would indicate. And then now 6-1 on the road at Detroit. These are clunkers of performances by the Blues, and you have eliminated that coach as a variable. What does that say about the roster that's now in place?
It says that you don't have you have a roster that doesn't have the ability to regain focus and stay focused on winning. Like, look around the NHL. Like, Nashville has put together a nice string of games. Now, as I talked about on Saturday, Nashville also went through a streak where they lost 4 of 5 prior to this winning streak that they're in. But they're back on a winning streak. Detroit has won 5 straight hockey games after an OT winner against Chicago the other day. And what's interesting about it is I just looked at this during the commercial break because, we get blindsided by they won 8 out of 10, and you're thinking, okay, well, this team's figured it out somewhat. But, like, if you go through this since Drew Bannister has taken over, they've had 2, maybe 3 games where you look at it and you say, okay, but then they'll have duds. You start the first couple of games off that the Blues played, it was the Ottawa Senators and the Dallas Stars. But then you laid an egg against the Tampa Bay Lightning. You pick up a good game. You lay the dud against Chicago that you came from behind. I went through it from Bannister. 2 games, dud. 2 games, dud. Not that they're losses, but it's games that your team chose not to show up in for a full 60 minutes. They decided to play for one period, or they started off well, or you're not getting a ton of shots.
Is that kind of hockey, though? For the most part, like, don't a lot of teams that aren't great kind of fall into that criteria? I'm not trying to push back, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like that's kind of the way that this works with a team, where you're just trying to find ways to come out with the points.
But what kind of teams are we talking about? Are you talking about teams that you look at and you say, yeah, their roster's not in place? Like, yeah, that team, like, I look at Nashville, and I can understand when they go through slumps like that.
What the Blues are? The Blues roster isn't in place. Look at the middle 6, man.
We came into the season, and the area we were talking about needed to improve was your middle 6 and your defensive. Well, defensively, they haven't been a liability compared to what they were last year. And I would say your middle 6 has probably been exactly what you thought they were going to be.
Oh, I think it's been pretty disappointing.
I think Kevin Hayes and Brandon Saad are exactly what I expected them to be. The disappointing ones are Sammy Blake, Kasperi Kapanen, and Jakub Vrana.
And Braden Shen.
I think Braden Shen's right where he typically is.
30 points and a -18.
The -18,
games
sure.
Of the season.
I think we're talking about somebody who's going to have 50 or 60 points by the end of the season. Maybe that's not in the...
He's on pace for 45 points. He's on pace for a -26 on the year. I think it's totally reasonable to be disappointed by what you've seen this year.
And maybe that's the standards of a second-line centerman for some people, but to me, the underperforming ones have been your top line. And that, where if I go to other teams and look at their roster construction and say, well, at least they've got their top players figured out. They've got to figure out how to add depth. So that's where I'm getting at. Like, what it tells me that you have been consistently inconsistent is your roster is not at the point that you thought they were in this stage of a retool. This retool was the level that Doug Armstrong expected, was pushing towards the offensive zone, as he told us, and also fighting for the middle tier of a playoff spot. Now, you're in that middle tier, but I would argue you have been very inconsistent since Drew Bannister has taken over.
Yeah, not to push back too hard. I understand where you're coming from. I feel like this roster is not at all in place for the retool. And I think we knew that coming into the season. Like, I actually think this has been a pretty good season for the Blues when it comes to roster construction conversations, because you've had Jake Neighbors, which has added his name to a top 6 forward spot. You have Jimmy Snuggerud, who has done nothing to convince you that he's not going to be a part of the future for you. I think Bolduc, what we've seen from him so far, it looks like a third line forward to me for the long haul, potentially. Robert Thomas has clearly emerged as a number one center. All right, we're starting to put some pieces together here. Now, the negatives are, I don't think Jordan Kyrou has emerged as a top-line forward at all for you. And Pavel Buchnevich, I think there are now more questions even than what there were at the beginning of the season on if he's going to be here for the long term. And I think that's really what it is. It's about those two players. Forget everything else, because who knows what the future holds for Kevin Hayes here in St. Louis. It was never expected to be a long-term marriage between those two sides. Kasperi Kapanen was a placeholder. Jakub Vrana was a placeholder. Sammy Blais was a placeholder. We knew that whenever we came into this regular season. Brandon Saad even, placeholder for you right now. The real premise of the conversation is Kyrou Buchnevich. And I think for me, I can't speak for you, Alex, or anybody in our listening audience. When they made the change from Craig Berube to Drew Bannister, the stated goal was forget everything else on our roster. Forget everything else about the way that we're playing. Forget even the wins and losses, if we're being totally honest. You have to get the most out of that top line. We have to find out, was this a Craig Berube problem, or was this a Buch, Thomas, Kyrou problem? We know it's not a Thomas problem at this point. I'm pretty sure it's not a Buchnevich problem, even though it's been a frustrating year at times with him. I think what we can now say, after seeing it with multiple different coaches and multiple different schemes, multiple situations, multiple lines, everything possible, it's a Kyrou problem. And so at this point, we have to have, and I think the Blues have to have, a real conversation about what does that mean? What do we do if we have a Jordan Kyrou problem on this roster? Not that he's a cancer or anything like this, but that he's $8 million towards a salary cap of $80 million. And if we have him on the roster, there is an opportunity cost, both with not having another player that could be on that top line and also not having that $8 million to spend. And third piece of this, we could just trade him for assets that would then allow us to go get something else. I think that's really what all of this is about. What do the Blues do with Kyrou specifically? And this gets us to the report, Alex, and it's a loose report, but a report nonetheless from the weekend from Ryan Whitney, former NHLer who is a key component of the Spittin' Chicklets podcast. And he put out over the weekend on Twitter, quote, "The Senators have something cooking right now. The rumor boys are hearing that Ottawa could maybe move Brady Tkachuk. Can't believe it, though, because no one could possibly be that dumb. They're 9 points out of the playoffs with 2 games in hand." That was it. Nothing more. He just put that out there, and then it was like a bomb exploded here in St. Louis. It was like, whoa, hold on. Brady Tkachuk's going to be available? What is going on here? There has been nothing from anybody else nationally that I have seen that corroborates this report. But, Alex, if somebody like a Brady Tkachuk, whether it is him or another young player that has shown promise that could be a franchise-caliber top winger for you, becomes available, that's what you make the move for. That is how you solve your Jordan Kyrou problem. You don't trade him for assets. That's going backwards. You trade him for a player that is definitively better than him, and Brady Tkachuk could be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, this is a make good for you missing out on the Matthew Tkachuk sweepstakes that were a few years ago. And it's a different Tkachuk. I think that's very important to understand. But it's a 24-year-old worth an $8.2 million who, if this report is true, which who knows, might have fallen out of grace with the Ottawa Senators. And we're talking about a player that might not be in the good graces of a Blues team because of the inconsistency. So, yeah, this is the type of hockey trade that you look for if you're Doug Armstrong to try and kind of reset this clock. It would make more sense for the Blues than the Ottawa Senators in this proposed deal, because I would imagine a player like Brady Tkachuk, if you're shipping out, you want somebody who is like that type of player. It's what Jeff Merrick told us on Friday. Like, if you're going to trade Pavel Buchnevich, you're looking for Pavel Buchnevich. But whatever the Ottawa Senators' mindset is there, for Doug Armstrong, you want to try and stay in this retool. You flip a player for another player who can play right into the slot that he wasn't matching up with well for the Blues.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is something important, too, with this conversation and that we haven't mentioned. I think Drew Bannister has done an excellent job so far as interim head coach. Like, to go 17-11-1 with this group, I think is a very impressive thing. No, but going back to the audio that we played from Doug Armstrong, as you said, the whole point of this was to see, okay, we're eliminating a variable with Craig Berube. We'll see if things change. Yes, things have changed a little bit, but what has changed? The first thing you talk about when you talk about things that have changed under Drew Bannister, it's the power play. Well, you got Brad Richards that came in just to focus on the power play. So not taking anything away from Drew Bannister at all, but you have someone else focusing on that power play. 5-on-5, things have not been good for this team. So when you boil it all down, it comes back to the roster. And I mean, I believe it was Craig Berube that said Pavel Buchnevich was their best 200-foot player. So when you're approaching the trade deadline and you're talking about trading a player like Buchnevich, who, yes, has underperformed at times this season, if you're going back to the roster as a whole and marking where the problems are, it's hard to put the problem on Pavel Buchnevich. And so that's why this trade deadline and where this team is at is so interesting right now, because it is a roster problem. You're boiling it down to the point where you're seeing that now.
Yep.
But if the problem is, or part of the solution is trading Pavel Buchnevich, I don't get it.
So I think we need to say this up front. The only reason we're even having the conversations about Buch and whether or not you trade him is because of the contract.
Yeah.
Like, this is the same conversations we had, if we're being candid, with the Barbashev situation. It got framed as, oh, BK hates Ivan Barbashev. No, I liked Ivan Barbashev a lot. The problem is everybody else in the NHL liked Barbie as well, which means he's going to sign a contract that the Blues just probably weren't ever going to be able to sign with him. And so you have to get the value in return for him via trade. And I think the same probably is going to be true of Pavel Buchnevich. Why do you have to potentially trade him? Because, man, he's a really good player. And a lot of teams around the league would love to have somebody like a Pavel Buchnevich on their second line for a winning organization. And they'll pay $8-9 million, somewhere in that range, to be able to acquire a player like that on a really long-term deal. But he's 30 years old, and if you're the Blues, does that fit with your timeline? If he was on a 4-year contract, we're not having any of these conversations about Pavel Buchnevich. He's a part of your future, he's a part of your present, and we can just kind of move on from that. He is somewhere in your top six. Even if he's not a top-line player, he's a top six forward, a bona fide top six forward. But the contract is a real thing. Kyrie's different. Kyrie's the guy that we're having these conversations about because of the contract's number, but not because of the length. We're having the conversation because his no trade clause kicks in soon. And if you don't do this now, you're probably not going to be able to do it anytime in the near future. So if you're going to move on from a guy like Jordan Kyrou, and we're getting a lot of these texts that are like, oh, you guys were just all in on the Blues 3 days ago, and now the world is ending. It's not. I feel the same way about the Blues today as I did a week ago, as I did 2 weeks ago, as I did 3 weeks ago. The Blues are fine. They're a fine team that is not good at 5-on-5, that relies too heavily on goaltending on some nights, and that relies really heavily right now on special teams. And if any of those three things folds, they're going to lose that game, and it's probably going to look ugly because they don't have enough at 5-on-5 to be able to keep them on afloat. That's the reality of what this team is. It is a really fragile build currently. But when those things are going well, goaltending looks good, power play looks good, penalty kill does a good job, you look pretty good. You look like a decent team. And that might be enough for this team to make it to the postseason. Sneak in, and then maybe Jordan Bennington can win you a series. I still feel that way about them today. The thing that has changed for me over the last 2 weeks is with Kyrou and the potential urgency of making that kind of a move. And when a player like Brady Tkachuk potentially becomes available on the market, and who knows the validity of this report, or if this is going to happen at the deadline or the offseason or ever, honestly. But those are the kinds of opportunities that if they present themselves, you have to explore if you're the Blues. And with Kyrou, I'm now to a place with him specifically where I can't fool myself any longer. I can't talk myself into, well, it's going to get better. No, now we have to have the cold, hard reality of this conversation thrown into our faces like cold water in the morning. Jordan Kyrou, probably the best use of that asset is going to be via trade to try to get somebody that you think is a top-line winger for you for the long haul.
Yeah, the reason we're talking about this is because your top line has failed. Your top line failed the assessment that it was given last year when the contract extensions were there, and you said this top line gets us out of the retool. It didn't. So what you try to do is you try and trade a player who might be a top-line player for another team, but is just not a top-line player for this team for that top-line player. And a lot of people are saying you don't screw up the build that the Blues are doing because of all these players coming up. You don't bring a Jimmy Snuggerud, a Dalibor Dvorsky, or a Zack Bolduc and throw him into your top line right away. That takes 3 to 4 years before you get to that part. And I know Jake Neighbors has kind of pushed his way into that conversation. That's a different piece of the puzzle. You don't force those players into that. Those are the complementary pieces, which at the beginning of our conversation, that part was understandable it failed because you were taking chances on Kapanen, Verana, and Sammy Blais. What you weren't taking chances on, what you were banking on, is Kyrou and Buchnevich, and both have not lived up to the expectations.
He's Alex Ferrario. That is Grant Francis, and I'm Brandon Kiley. The Blues are off tonight, back in action tomorrow in Winnipeg. Winnipeg's in an interesting spot, by the way. We'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow. One of the best teams in the NHL, but they're talking about how their attendance is so bad right now. I don't know what the future holds for hockey in Winnipeg, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. Blues pregame with Alex tomorrow night here on 101 ESPN beginning at 6 o'clock. Coming up next, we got to dive into some NFL quick hitters. Free agency, it kind of officially starts in the NFL at the NFL Combine, and that officially kicks off later on today. What is going to happen with this receiver market? Sounds like it's already off and running. We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN. We'll get to NFL quick hitters here in just a moment, but Alex, we should pass along the news that we just saw on Twitter from Susan Slusser, who covers Major League Baseball out in the Bay Area. She reports that Nick Ahmed is going to be signing with the San Francisco Giants. This essentially puts an end to the Giants' potential bringing back Brandon Crawford, a guy that is, a franchise player for them that's been around for all of their championships. The reason why you're interested in this, as a Cardinals fan, I would assume, is because she then continued to suggest that the Cardinals and Brandon Crawford could come together quickly on a deal because the Cardinals are one of the teams that has shown significant interest in Crawford of late. He would not be my preferred option at shortstop. I mentioned earlier today, I think the Cardinals should go out to the market to sign one of the remaining shortstops. The three guys of note are Brandon Crawford, Nick Ahmed, and Elvis Andrus. Nick Ahmed and Elvis Andrus last year were both either average or above average defensively. Brandon Crawford was an atrocity defensively at shortstop. He was also really bad at the plate. This would be like if Paul DeJong had worse defensive numbers. That would be what you're bringing in with Brandon Crawford. Seems to be a good clubhouse guy.
So this is essentially bringing in another Matt Carpenter.
But, yeah, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, and
see, I can go ahead and live with the fact that you're pushing off a guy like Alec Burleson for an Elvis Andrus or a Nick Ahmed. At least defensively, they have real value for you. It's really hard for me to say, you should do that for Brandon Crawford. And I've been the guy that's saying you don't have a backup shortstop on the team right now.
Yeah, what's wild, I would assume if they sign him to a contract, it's not going to be like what we talked about, to where it's, hey, thanks for your service, but we don't need you following spring training, and you cut him. And I guess maybe they could still do that, but yeah, if you sign him to a contract, it sure seems like you're going to be kicking somebody to the curb. Maybe it's kicking... I guess because Jose Fermin's not even on this roster to begin,
not on the 26th.
Unless Tommy Edman starts on the injured list at the beginning of the season, and then you're going to put like a Fermin on the 26th, which would mean you're putting Brandon Crawford in. But yeah, defensively, I know he won a Gold Glove 3 years ago, but defensively, 28 errors in his last 2 seasons for the San Francisco Giants. This is bad, and if you're going to cut Alec Burleson, who you could potentially trade him to get something, that's not a good look for the team.
Brandon Crawford was once a really good player, a guy that I think was underrated for the vast majority of his career.
John Dent reporting Matt Carpenter, who was supposed to start at first base, isn't playing today, so
there you go.
Maybe he starts on the injured list.
Last year, 195 batting average, an on-base percentage that dipped below 300, 37% below league average offensively, and that is not to mention what he did defensively for the Giants. It was a disaster of a season for Brandon Crawford last year. Now, maybe he's going to get it back at the age of 37. I'm going to go ahead and take the under. I don't know that would be my pivot, but hey, who's to say? All right, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters. Alex, the first thing I want to get to is the free agency market, which is kind of off and running already. T. Higgins officially franchise tagged by the Cincinnati Bengals. There was a report yesterday the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are expected to get some kind of a contract extension done with Mike Evans. If those guys are off the market, and Michael Pittman Jr., who is expected to be franchised by the Colts, is also off the market, who's the wide receiver that you would be most interested from this year's free agency class? There's some interesting ones.
I was going to say, can you give me some names? Because I'm not really, with those names off of the board, I'm not really sure there's a lot of guys that scream, I have to get this player for my roster.
Yeah, it's a lot of number 2 wide receivers without them on it. The headliners are probably Hollywood Brown. You
OBJ.
Could go out there and Odell Beckham is available this offseason. Curtis Samuel.
I think Mecole Hardman might be one of the more intriguing ones.
No. That's
Calvin Ridley, I could see somebody taking another chance on him if he hits it. Noah Brown, after kind of how he fared in Houston towards the end of the season.
Gabe Davis is
Gabe
out there.
Davis, I think he'll probably be the headliner, especially when you're talking about a guy who could...
You're a team. You need to go out there. You got to get a receiver this offseason. Who's the one that you're most interested in?
Gabe Davis would be the guy I would go for, because he's the one that I would say closely resembles, or as close resembles, a number 1 wide receiver for a team. All of these other guys, they're all complementary pieces. Like Josh Reynolds is a great piece, but I don't think Josh Reynolds is the name brand. Same with Marquise Brown, Calvin Ridley. So yeah, I would go Gabe Davis as the number 1.
If I was sure that he was healthy, I think I would go Marquise Hollywood Brown. I've always really liked him, man. I don't think he's a number 1. I think he's a number 2 wide receiver. But he's only 27 years old, still really young, has great speed whenever he is able to stay on the field. But the health status is the thing that really is of concern there. I like Calvin Ridley, but did you guys know he's almost 30?
Yeah.
He's old, man. Like,
missed those years.
A really old player in the NFL, got into the league late, and now he's going to be somebody that is hitting the free agent market for the first time a year later than expected because of that gambling suspension that took place. All right, next thing up here as we go through some NFL quick hitters. Alex, there's been some news earlier today. It sounds like Caleb Williams not going to throw at the NFL Combine. Jaden Daniels might not be participating in anything at the NFL Combine. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to be running or doing anything at the Combine, and then he's not going to do it at the Pro Day either. He's just completely opting out, essentially, of the pre-draft stuff, saying, hey, watch my film. I'm a really good player. That's all you need to know about me. Who's the guy at this week's Combine that you're most interested in?
I mean, it's probably one of those other two wide receivers, Odunze and who's the other one? N'Kobe? The other wide receiver.
In this year's draft?
The other top guy, the other top wide receiver with Harrison Jr. It's Romeo.
Odunze.
And then who was the other guy?
And then Neighbors.
Yeah, so those are the two. I would say probably one of those two. I mean, honestly, you got all of these quarterbacks right now that are intriguing, but because you're not going to have the headliners, because Jaden Daniels would be the one that I would be most interested in, because I'm very curious of kind of what he turns into. But I would say maybe one of those two wide receivers, because if they go well in that Combine and have good pro days whenever they have them, you could see them climb up the ladders in terms of rankings, at least in the top 5.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what Brock Bowers does at the NFL Combine.
That's a good one. I saw most recently, he was like 8th overall, I saw in a mock draft.
I can't get that picture of him next to Rob Gronkowski out of my head. He looked so small. And that's not the end-all, be-all, but dude, if I'm taking a tight end in the top 10 picks, you better be an athletic freak. Like, you better go out there this week at the NFL Combine and put up some crazy numbers, because you've got to be able to make up for your lack of size with some serious athleticism. And we saw how great he was in his time at Georgia, but that's the guy that I'm most interested in. It's really hard to become an elite level tight end at the NFL level. Think about all of the guys that we've seen, Alex, in recent seasons that have gone in the first round and then they just become nothing or become average in the NFL. At one point, Noah Fant, the former Iowa tight end, was like the second coming. And then we see the Atlanta Falcons go out there and take Kyle Pitts in the first round. He was supposed to be the greatest tight end in the league. He's been fine. Nothing's great. So I want to see what Brock Bowers is able to do at this week's NFL Combine. And if he tears up the scene, great. That's exactly what you want to see. If not, I wonder if we see him drop a little more than what people are expecting.
Which could be a steal. If you're talking about a guy that has first-round talent that you get late in the first or early second. Is there any interest in what McCartney does?
J.J. McCarthy? Yeah. I don't really care about what any of the quarterbacks do.
Yeah. Pro days don't, or combines really don't matter when it comes to those quarterbacks.
No, because they're throwing to a bunch of receivers that they've never thrown to before. I want to see that you're athletic. They will all show that they're really athletic at the Combine, but that's why I don't care when quarterbacks decide not to throw. I don't blame them. I wouldn't throw if I was a top 5 selection either.
I'll be interested how much hype comes out about McCarthy, though, after the Combine, because it's going to turn into, like it typically does, one guy that's like, oh, this is a can't-miss quarterback you got to take, and he skyrockets in the draft.
Put him on the board. Look at how great he is in the room.
And then once the draft comes around, he doesn't get picked to like 18th or 19th overall.
I do think he's going to go top 10.
Ugh.
I think he's the guy that's going to end up getting selected a lot higher than what people are currently anticipated. All right, coming up next, Cody Bellinger officially signed with the Chicago Cubs late last night. What does that mean for the remaining Boris 4? Does it mean that the Cardinals should be getting back in on one of them, even though they're very unlikely to do so? We'll talk about it next here on 101 ESPN.
BT here with you for my friends over at Mentality. Fellas, maybe you're dealing with low energy, a lack of motivation. Maybe you're moody, could be irritable. You know what these are? These are all signs of low testosterone. It doesn't matter what age you are. That can affect any man out there, but there's an answer. The answer is Mentality, and you got to check them out at the website, lowtusa.com. That's lowtusa.com. Mentality is also covered by most insurances, fellas. Get in there. Check them out. It's Mentality.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends at Classic Air Care when it comes to your HVAC system. As you're going to realize over these next couple of days, and then the day following when it's 80 degrees and then goes down to 40 degrees, your unit is going to be doing a lot of work, which means it's going to have to be in top condition. And you want to make sure you've got a company that is always there to help you out. And that's why I've been using Classic Air Care for the last 6 years. I'm on their maintenance program, which means they come out every 6 months. They check the unit before I flip it on for the air and flip it on for the heat. And if there's issues, their customer service is at its best. And if you don't believe me, check out their hundreds of reviews with their 4.8 Google reviews rating. You see tons of different people speaking of the customer service that they get. This one's from Sue. Jack was amazing. He figured out a long-time problem in our kitchen and was able to get it working. My air went off in the middle of the summer, and Jack and Classic Air Care were there at my house within the next 12 hours. Make sure you use a company as great as this. That was just from Sue. You'll see tons of the ratings up on Google Review. Classic Air Care, check them out, classicaircare.com.
Trading your car at a dealership? Get serious. Your car is worth more and they want to pay you less. Get full retail value without the retail hassle at sellmycarstl.com. With a new convenient location on Manchester Road in Bowen, that's sellmycarstl.com.
Sponsored by Amarin.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. A rough one for the Blues this past Saturday in Detroit, a 6-1 loss to the Red Wings as they got swept in the season series by Detroit, and the Blues fall out of the playoff picture in the Western Conference. Now 4 points behind Nashville, though they do have 2 games in hand for that final wild card spot. They'll look to gain some ground tomorrow as they head up to Canada to take on Winnipeg, and then the Oilers the next day. Tomorrow's game, a 6 o'clock pregame and a 7 o'clock puck drop here on your home for the Blues, 101 ESPN. And for St. Louis City SC over the weekend, they played to a draw with Real Salt Lake in the first MLS regular season match of the season for St. Louis. They will be back in action tomorrow against Houston as they continue play in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I'm Grant France. The Sports Center update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating, Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
So Cody Bellinger got his contract. Maybe not the one that he was looking for, but a contract nonetheless. It's a 3-year deal, Alex, with the Chicago Cubs worth $80 million. Here is a bit of a caveat. It's an opt-out situation where you can opt out of this deal after this season or after next season, or you can take the full 3-year deal worth $80 million. $30 million this year, $30 million next year, and then a $20 million year 3 kicker. Ken Rosenthal reported over the last 24 hours or so over on The Athletic that, quote, now that Bellinger's terms are public, it would not be surprising for Snell, Montgomery, and Chapman to end up settling for similar bridge types of deals. Alex, I don't have a whole lot of interest in talking about the Bellinger side of things for the Cubs. It makes them better. But he was also on the team last year. So let's not act as if this was them going out and signing Shohei Ohtani or adding a significant piece to the core of what was already there. No, this is just basically bringing back what they previously had. I think the Cubs are going to be really solid. They'll be right there with the Cardinals this season in the NL Central. End of that conversation. What I find really interesting here in St. Louis is what this means for the other Boris clients. I know what it means for the Cardinals. They will sit there and listen to what we're talking about right now and say, nah, we're not doing any of that. But I do think it's worth having a conversation about. If Blake Snell is going to settle for a deal similar, if not equal to, what Cody Bellinger just signed, it means that he is going to go year to year with whatever the next contract is that he signs. And if you're the Cardinals, that is exactly what you want. How many times have we heard John Mozeliak talk about being opportunistic? Never say never. Always be open to what is out there available to you at any time. Well, no, this is your perfect opportunity to go out there and be opportunistic with the exact kind of pitcher that you're currently lacking from your rotation. You went out there at the beginning of the offseason and signed 2 innings eaters in Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson that could be at the back end of your rotation to help bolster, give you more innings, more depth that Blake Snell does not provide for you. And so you are covered in that regard. You're not at an innings deficit like you have been in previous years where I don't know that Blake Snell would have been the ideal marriage for what the Cardinals needed. Now what you're lacking is quality. You need a guy that can go out there every 5th day and give you 5 to 6 innings of just filth. Go out there, give you a new look with velocity, with strikeout stuff. You get to the postseason, he's giving you 5 innings at the front end of your rotation, and now we're looking at it, it's like, okay, you've got Snell, you've got Sonny Gray, you've got one of whoever pitches the best out of the rest of the season with Gibson, Michaelis, and Lynn. That is the makings of a legitimate contending rotation. And if he's willing to take a short-term deal, the risk that we were previously talking about what year 4, 5, 6, 7 beyond looks like for you, well, that's mitigated because now you don't have to get to year 4, 5, 6, 7 or beyond on that contract. I don't know what his deal is going to look like. And if it goes beyond the 3-4 years, I still don't think the Cardinals probably will or should be interested. But this is a situation where Mo should absolutely be circling back right now with Scott Boras and saying, what are you looking for? Because Blake Snell is exactly the kind of pitcher that they're probably going to have to target at the deadline. And instead of having to give up a massive haul, you could go out there and get him for nothing more than the qualifying offer draft pick that'll be attached to him.
I think both of these starting pitchers are only going to sign with opt-outs in their first year and their second year because they're going to want to reset the market for themselves, which is exactly what I'm doing if I'm John Mozeliak. Now, I know they're player options, which that means they hold all of the cards in terms of if they stay here or don't stay here, but who cares if you're Mo? If they come here and make you a better team, then you've reset the mindset of your team in the NL Central. Now that a Cody Bellinger signing has taken place, I don't see the harm in exploring this because it benefits your team. Now, the flip of this is we know how John Mozeliak operates. It's, well, the one thing that matters is do they want to be here? That's why the Blake Snell thing doesn't even sound like they'd even explored. The Jordan Montgomery is the one that I would be more interested in. Now, I know they're different pitchers in terms of Blake Snell's the Cy Young potential and Jordan Montgomery at best is a number 2. But you just said it. This is the move you're going to be looking for at the trade deadline. And guess what you don't have to do right now? Give up prospects. Give up players that you're afraid to trade away to get pitchers. And sure, there are other teams that are probably going to be aggressive on this. I've seen the reports that Montgomery and the Red Sox have already had discussions. Of course, the Yankees and the Blake Snells have already had the discussions. But there's no harm in calling and saying, what do we need to do to get you in St. Louis? And I just don't want to hear what Katie Woo was reporting, and I understand she's reporting it, and it's what the Cardinals say, but it's
just the messenger, not the...
It's the part that's so frustrating for fans, because I don't care that you feel good about your rotation right now, and you've got the depth, and you've got the guys that are providing you innings. You don't have the talent in your rotation to get you to where you expect to be. That's the problem.
And it only costs you money.
Yeah.
I understand. They might be close to their budget. They're not at their budget. We know that. Mo said at winter warm-up, hey, there's still money available for us. If we want to go out there and make some more moves, we can. Maybe that meant there's like $10 million that's available to them. They're also going to have to spend some money, of course, for Brandon Crawford if they go that route. By the way, just to pass this along, Matt Carpenter was scratched from today's game due to left wrist contusion. His playing status is day-to-day. So that's the latest with Matt Carpenter.
There you go. Enter Brandon Crawford.
Yeah, there you go. Need some more leadership to be on the bench that is active.
You take one out, you got to put one back in.
That's right. Left-handed bat as well, so you got that ready to go. When you go into a season like this and you're lacking that number 2 starter and you have a little bit of money to spend, this is where you get creative, man. And if you're John Mozeliak, maybe you go to Blake Snell, you go to Scott Boras, and you say, listen, you guys were looking for a 5-year, $125 million deal. You were talking about more, but that's really what you were willing to settle for. Nobody's giving you that. What if we gave you a 3-year, $80 million deal? The same thing that you just got from Cody Bellinger. $30 million year 1. You can opt out after that if you want to. $30 million year 2. You can opt out after that if you want to, and then 20 in year 3. And this allows you to have that pillow contract where you're making the money you were hoping you would get in year 1. You go fight, you go pitch for the opportunity to get back to the market. And then if you're Mo, the kicker is we won't QO you. Yeah. You won't be attached to the qualifying offer this upcoming offseason. You can put that into a contract that, hey, he's ineligible for the qualifying offer. We won't attach that to you. So you go in this season, you battle for it, and you're ready to go. And if you end up having a great season by next offseason, maybe you do go out there and you get a better contract. You misread the market this year. There's more certainty for clubs next offseason with what they're going to have TV money-wise. And now you get a team that had a serious injury with their rotation. Maybe the Mets are ready to contend. The Cubs take another step. The Rangers are in a better place. One of those teams that's really willing to spend can go out there and give you the contracts that you're looking for. But in the meantime, we're an easy division. You're not going to go up against the big bad boys from the AL East or the NL West as often if you pitch here. You're in a stadium that is very pitcher-friendly, and we've got a pretty good defense potentially coming into this season. And, by the way, you don't really rely on that stuff anyways because you're a strikeout artist. Mm-hmm. This is a good situation for Blake Snell potentially, and it's a really good situation for the Cardinals with Blake Snell in that rotation, but all of this is a moot point because they won't do it.
Yeah, and I also think the other side of it, too. I think the other side is the Scott Boras side of it, and I don't think the Cardinals want to negotiate with that guy who's still trying to get the best out of his players. And if you do have to settle for one of these deals just to get somewhere, I would have a strong urge to sign with a team that's got World Series aspirations over a Cardinals team that doesn't really feel like they're making a push.
I think with Blake Snell, you have World Series aspirations. If you put Blake Snell into the current rotation, this is a team that can win the World Series.
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird because we haven't been looking at them that way, but imagine, I'm telling you, have a guy that won the Cy Young this year in the National League and finished second in the Cy Young voting last year in the American League as the leading pitchers for your rotation this year. And behind them, you have Miles Michaelis, who 2 years ago threw 200 innings and had a sub-3.5 ERA right here in St. Louis for your Cardinals. Like, that is a World Series caliber rotation, man.
Yeah.
And they've got a lineup that can compete 1 through 7 with just about anybody not named the Dodgers or the Braves in all of baseball. If a couple of things go right, you add Blake Snell to this rotation, you're right there. But they won't do it. Coming up next, the Chunk Jar here on 101.
We get Crawford.
into the Jump Shore alongside Alex Ferrario and Crane Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. So, Alex, it was warm yesterday here in St. Louis. It's warm once again today.
Beautiful.
It's going to be warm over the next couple of days. You love this time of the year. I'm going to take out baby boy. We're going to go on a walk later on this afternoon. That is my afternoon activity of choice when the weather's warm like this. For you, you decided yesterday, I want to go play some golf.
Absolutely.
More than a reasonable decision.
Mm-hmm.
Most people would say, I'm going to go play 9. I'm going to go play 18.
Nope.
Not Alex Ferrario.
Nope.
Alex Ferrario looked at the weather, saw that it was his dad's birthday, and said, you know what? I want to go play 36 on this Sunday afternoon. What in the hell got into you for that?
Look, when Papa Doc wants to go out and golf, there's one thing. You don't just go out and golf for 18 holes. You go out and golf until you can't golf anymore. And we play 36 holes. That is exhausting. I don't know if people...
I know how you golf. There's no way you were standing by the end of this thing.
Well,
no chance.
Standing, but not standing still. Standing kind of all over the place. But
leaning against something.
Look, when we golf, we go out, we have fun. I am not a pro golfer by any means. Frankly, of course, I'm not a pro golfer. I don't even go out there and try to play well. I go out there to try and have fun, which is kind of how we do it. I don't golf with other people because, like, when people invite me to golf, they want to go out there and they're serious, right? Like, don't talk in our backswing. You know, make sure that we're following the rules of the golf course. When I go out there with my dad, my cousin, and my brother-in-law, it's a foursome that we do. We go out there and talk in each other's backswings. We go out there and we don't follow most rules on the golf courses. And we go out there and we have some fun with adult beverages. And by adult beverages, I mean we go to the gas station and we buy those mini shooters. But we don't just go buy.
I got you for Christmas. Just a bunch of mini shooters.
We don't buy Fireball or Pink Whitney or American Honey. No, we switched. We go, well, we drink them, but we go out there and what we do, if you've ever been to a gas station and seen those shooters, we buy the most random and nasty sounding shooters you can think.
The pickle ones.
The pickle ones. They got this like root beer shooter, cream soda shooter.
I never want to hear you complain about my food choices again.
Well, we're not doing it because we
disgusting.
like it. We do it because we want to get, nasty with it, with what we're doing out there. And let me tell you something. When you're golfing and you're shooting those, it's brutal. And we do it shot by demand. So there's 4 of us. We all have a certain amount of shots that we have for the 18 or 36 holes. And whenever you want, you just call it out. And so most of the time what we do is everybody calls it out after each other. So the first 8 holes are a little brutal, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, so are the next 28.
No, you sober up as you go. You sober up.
Do you? How long were you on the links yesterday?
We teed off at 12. I think we left there at like 6:30.
My God.
6:30. Well, actually, we got there at 11:30. We teed off at like 12. Yeah, I think we were there till about 6:30 or 7.
Somebody said golf is a manly event. I can understand why BK can't relate. Is golf considered manly?
I don't think so. Like what do you mean, men? Like, a bunch of men golf? No.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't see a bunch of burly-chested individuals out there golfing.
By the way, I have no problem with golf. I have never gotten into it, not because it's not something that interests me, but because I just don't have the time to do it.
It's fun, man. Like,
I would love nothing more than to be good at golf. That sounds like it would be super cool.
But you don't have to be good at golf.
No, I mean,
enjoy golf.
The people that are good at golf don't have fun on the golf course. They're the people that, damn it, I shot 3 under. I think I finished yesterday like 12 over.
There's no chance you kept the score on the second.
Well, somebody keeps score. Did I keep score? Absolutely not. Somebody in our group keeps score.
They kept score just as well as the NHL off-ice officials.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it gets to the point where...
Or they did at the Cardinals spring training game the other day. Did you see that? The scoreboard was off the entirety of the game.
Oh, that sounds about right.
It was messed up.
It's to the point when we're out there golfing and we're just, laughing because we just hit that point where you just can't, form words. Somebody always screams, hit the ball in the middle. That's how our golf outings usually go.
He's Alex, that's Grant Francis, and I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we're going to get into a game of in or out. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. You give us a scenario. We'll tell you if we are in or out here on BK and Ferrario. By the way, there has been a little bit of an update on the Brandon Crawford front for those that missed it earlier today. Susan Slusser reported that the San Francisco Giants are close and now it appears have come to a deal with Nick Ahmed on a minor league deal for the Giants. So he was one of the remaining shortstops that was available. She then added in her report that Brandon Crawford not expected to be back with the Giants this year as a result of that deal. And instead, He is talking to other teams, the Cardinals chief among them. Derek Gould saying there is, quote, mutual interest between the Cardinals and the former Gold Glover in Brandon Crawford. The team has indeed been looking for a backup on the market. Susan Slusser added that, quote, I have heard that it could come together pretty quickly. Alex, let me say this on the front end. I appreciate that they are at least acknowledging that there is a problem here, that they do need to add. I also think signing somebody would probably be quite the public admission that Tommy Edman's not going to be ready for opening day. He would not be my choice. Brandon Crawford would not be my choice. Now, I do want to say, just full disclosure, I looked at one defensive metric. It was horrible for Brandon Crawford last year. There are others that are a little bit better. So depending on where you look, maybe it wasn't as bad as I led on earlier today. I do want to say that on the front end. The offense was atrocious. And if you're bringing him in, your bench to open up the season could be something like Matt Carpenter, Brandon Crawford, your backup catcher, Alec Burleson, and who am I missing? Because Carlson would already be on the roster.
I think that's it.
I guess one other guy.
Jose Fermin.
Yeah, it's not a great bench to say the least. So you're getting young, or you're getting older, and you're getting less productive.
No, I guess the other guy on the bench would be Brendan Donovan or Nolan Gorman, right? Because one's playing second base. Yeah, I mean, to have one guy off of the bench who is solely like a guy break glass in case of emergency is one thing. To have two of them where they don't really have a defined role. Offensively, they're not going to provide you much. At least Matt Carpenter, what he's got going for him is he still sees the strike zone well and can draw walks. I don't believe that to be the case for Brandon Crawford. To have two of those guys means you're taking up two spots on the bench, which means you were relying heavily on all of your other players to stay healthy all season, which is going to be a disaster.
I don't know what Elvis Andrus is looking for, but that would be my preferred route here. He's old, just like Brandon Crawford is, but not quite as old. Was better offensively a year ago and is more than capable as a defensive player and has been known as a really good clubhouse guy for the entirety of his career as well. So that would be my preferred route, but at least they're willing to acknowledge that there's a problem here. So credit to them, I suppose, in that regard. Coming up next, Zack Bolduc has shown me a little something in his first couple of games with the NHL roster, and it's not in the way that I expected it to happen. We'll talk about it next here on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friend Tracy Bibb when it comes to insurance. Her and her team are the best over at Allstate. And congrats to Tracy, too, because she just finished up running the race out in Disney World that was raising money for Be the Match. Tracy was doing that for all of those out there, and that's what I love about Tracy. First of all, she's always helping you out with your insurance, making sure you get the right coverage. But Tracy truly cares about the community and her clients. She's involved in so many different charitable events that when you use her, when you call for a free non-committal quote, she's donating money to these different charities. So check in with Tracy Bibb, because when it comes to insurance, she's always making sure she's saving you the proper amount of money and you get the best customer service. Give her a call, 314-328-4260. You can tell her I sent you, and you can get a free non-committal quote. She'll walk you through the whole process of getting on with her and her team. 314-328-4260. It's no fib. You're always in great hands with the Bibb.
Down into the corner it goes. Offside into the slot. Bolduc, he shoots, he scores! His first point and his first goal in the NHL. Puts the Blues on the board in Detroit. 7:32 to go in the second period of play. Zack Bolduc the goal. It's a 4-1 score.
So what it sounded like over the weekend is Zack Bolduc gets his first career NHL goal, a good one there for him, and he was one of the very few bright spots, maybe the lone bright spot, Alex, for the Blues over the weekend. And I think he's done a pretty good job in each of his first 2 games thus far. Frankly, it's not in the way that I was expecting it to be. He looks more kind of like a Kasperi Kapanen type of a player than a Jordan Kyrou, for example. He does work maybe not into the front of the net areas, but closer to the net than I was expecting. Defensively, I haven't really noticed like a massive liability with him on the ice thus far. I'm sure there will be moments. He's young. He's a young player as much as anything, but I've been impressed early on with what we've seen from Zack Bolduc. What have you seen from the young kid?
I've been impressed, too. Like, that first game was not an ideal one for him to get into because of all of the penalties and the lack of ice time. But when he was on the ice, you saw what he put an emphasis on in the American Hockey League this season. He was skating, he was back checking, he was trying to make plays in his own zone, but he was winning board battles and he was pursuing the puck. It wasn't, as I thought Zack Bolduc was, it wasn't like he was floating in the offensive zone where he was waiting for plays to come to him. He was fighting for the puck with his line mates. And that was even more on display in that Detroit Red Wings game because multiple times he was the first one in, he was behind the net, he was floating around the net looking for the pass, but he was working with his teammates to create the goal scoring. And that goal that he scored, Brandon Saad did the work, but that's what you want out of a goal scorer. You want that mindset to go where the puck is not, go where the players aren't, and Bolduc went right into the slot and waited for that pass for Brandon Saad. So I think he has made massive steps and progress from what he was last year and 2 years ago in training camps, which forced him back into juniors, in terms of being more noticeable on the ice and getting involved more for puck retrievals. And really, the upside of what Zack Bolduc provides that what Kapanen doesn't have, what Sammy Blais doesn't have, is he is a goal scorer. Bannister told Curbs on our pregame show, in the coaches show that they always do, Bannister told him that in 2 games, you already noticed how lethal his shot can be. He scored that goal, obviously, on the quick wrist shot, but he also took a slap shot on the power play in the third period that was a heavy slap shot, hit Jake Wallman, and Wallman had to step off of the ice because he was a little dinged up from it. When you watched that power play, there were shades of what David Perron used to do. So he's got the goal-scoring mentality, but what I noticed in those 2 games was a player that was working to get the puck, and that's what I think this Blues team desperately needs in their top 6.
I think I would go ahead and put him on one of the power plays.
Oh, absolutely.
I know that means you have to take somebody off. Like, if it's Brandon Saad, for example, I probably would be okay with that. Kevin Hayes, be okay with that.
I mean, take Oscar Sundqvist off of that second unit. I know he scored goals for you, but Brandon Saad plays what Oscar Sundqvist plays. He's a net front presence. I mean,
I would just keep Sonny out there. Personally,
you need a shooter on there. You're not taking Hayes off because Hayes is winning those faceoffs for you. He's been a better faceoff man. So it really comes down to you want to take Brandon Saad or Oscar Sundqvist off.
I would be fine with taking Brandon Saad off.
That's the only area he's been scoring goals recently. But you need a shooter on that unit. Frankly, for how bad that number 1 unit has been, I would put him on the first unit.
Sure.
I think you need a one-time shot that you don't have on that first power play unit.
Let's see what it looks like. It can't hurt you, you know. I would go ahead and give that a shot.
You're going Neighbors, Thomas, Booch, Bolduc.
Sure.
I don't know why you wouldn't try that. Bolduc's got the one-time shot from the far side. That's what this team's lacking right now.
When you look at the way that this team is building moving forward, and this is what we heard from the Blues owner a little while ago that Doug Armstrong is doing internally, which is, hey, I'm going to put together what I think the lineup looks like 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and we'll see how the pieces that we currently have on the team and what we eventually add to the team, how those fit in. I think Robert Thomas has established himself as a top-line player for a contending team, not just for the Blues, but for a contending team for years to come. Do you agree with that, Alex?
Yes.
Do you think that the Blues have anybody else currently on the roster that is a bona fide top-line player? For a contender, not for this team, but when they are competing for a Stanley Cup again, will be a legit top-line player.
No. I think anybody on this team you could trade to a team in the playoff spot, and they would be playing second or third line.
Totally agree. On your second line, I think Jake Neighbors has established himself as being that. I think either Kyrou or Buchnevich would fit in, honestly, for a contender as a second-line winger. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah.
I think the hope is that Dvorsky ends up as a second-line winger, or a second-line center for you, excuse me.
Second-line center or winger. I think he could be one of both.
And I think Snuggerud. The hope is that he becomes a top 6 forward for you, correct?
Mm-hmm.
As a third-line player, I think that's where Bolduc fits in. I think in a good scenario, he's probably a overqualified at times third-line winger that plays a little bit for you on the power play. He probably fits in, honestly, just into what Brandon Saad is right now for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think Bolduc's that, and I think Otto Stenberg is another one that matches a third-line role. Zach Dean is another one. Those are all third-line players.
And Braden Shen.
Yeah, you have
upside. In his career.
Exactly.
Is a third-line player.
Braden Shen is what Tyler Bozak was when the Blues signed Bozak.
Right now, what you're missing is eventually another third-line player. It's probably one of those guys you just mentioned, or they can add somebody from the outside, and it's 2 top-line players.
Yeah.
And when you look at what they have in that middle 6, Neighbors, Dvorsky, Snuggerud, and then the 2 guys, Buch and Kyrou, that could potentially fit into that criteria as well, you have a bit of a surplus there. If Brady Tkachuk becomes available, Alex, and there was the report over the weekend that Ryan Whitney said, hey, he believes there is something going on internally in Ottawa. He thinks they could make Brady Tkachuk available. We'll see. It's one report from one person. There's been nothing else that we have seen anywhere that would suggest that this is the case. But if Brady Tkachuk were to become available, do you make basically everything available not named Robert Thomas from your team? Robert Thomas and Jordan Bennington.
Yes, with an exception. I don't know if I can touch Snuggerud. And I know in this scenario, look, you're getting Brady Tkachuk, so what can you do? But you can't deplete your minor league system for one player, because then all that does is it pushes the Blues into a situation to where, sure, you got Tkachuk and Thomas, but now where's the depth coming from? Now the depth that you need to be second and third line players, you've traded away to get that top player. So now your top line is there, but you don't have that secondary and third scoring. So there's a limitation in terms of who I would give up to get a Matthew Tkachuk. But from my NHL roster, yeah, Thomas, Parayko, and Binnington. Otherwise, let's talk.
All right. Can we talk about the move that was just made by the
I'm
Blues?
glad you saw this because I'm infuriated right now.
Coming up next, the St. Louis Blues just activated Justin Falk from LTIR. Good to see Justin Falk is ready to go. He's available to them going into tomorrow night's game. The expectation is he'll be back on that pairing with Torrey Krug. That's the way that it was earlier today at practice. They have made their corresponding move, and I want to talk about it and what it means for the Blues next year on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends out at Ted Drew's. You heard me talk about how beautiful the weather was and how I spent my evening out golfing. The perfect way to end that type of night is to head over to Ted Drew's and get that famous frozen custard. Officially open for their 95th season, 95 years, 4 generations, serving St. Louisans that famous frozen custard. Family owned and operated, and they always build those family traditions. And what I mean by that is stuff I remember when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, being at Ted Drew's, sitting with the family in the back of the car, eating Ted Drew's frozen custard. That was a Friday staple. And now I do that with my girls, with my wife, going out to Ted Drew's famous frozen custard. Off of Chippewa, while you're there, walk across the parking lot and check out the Ted Drew's gift shop, where you could shop a variety of unique apparel, souvenirs, and so much more. You can also buy gift cards, which is the perfect gift to give to somebody that you're not really sure what else to get them. So go check them out. Check out Ted Drew's famous frozen custard off of Chippewa. It really is good, guys and gals.
Alex and Grant on BK. So there's some news from the St. Louis Blues. They have officially announced that Justin Falk is back. Congratulations to Justin Falk. It sounds like that injury, it seemed like he was weeks away at the time, and now very quickly thereafter, it was more of a days away conversation. That's good. It's good for Justin Falk, and I hope he's actually fully healthy this time around, because it seemed like last time he came back, he was not at 100%. That being said, when you activate somebody from LTIR, it means you have to send somebody out. And we said earlier today, Alex, we made our predictions on what that would be. I was kind of hopeful, honestly, that it would be Sammy Blais.
Mm-hmm.
It's over. It's clearly not working. They have jumped over him on the depth chart probably 5, 6, 7 different times so far this year, including right now where he's been a healthy scratch regularly for the Blues. They didn't go that route. After a really rough game on Saturday against the Detroit Red Wings, they decided to send down Matt Kessel. Now, I think if I had to guess, there were multiple factors that went into such a decision. One is you got to get as many games as possible the rest of the way for Scott Perunovich. So he's going to be in the lineup every day. And for those that aren't aware, he is something called a Group 6 free agent at the end of this season if he doesn't play in every game other than 4 down the stretch. He has to play in all but 4 games the rest of the way, or he will become a free agent. The Blues do not want that to happen. They are incentivized for him to be an RFA at the end of the season, so they can either decide to trade him or to keep him on a contract if they would like to. That's asset management right there. And he's a young player. You don't want him hitting free agency and you lose him for nothing. So it makes sense to me that he's going to be in the lineup every single night. He is apparently, it appears at least, based on the way that they've been utilizing him, much more comfortable on the right side than the left side. So that takes up that spot in your lineup. If Justin Falk is going to be back, you're going to have him in the lineup every single night. So that takes up another spot. Krug, Leddy, Parayko, they're all going to be in there every single night. So really it came down to Scandella versus Kessel, who's going to be in your lineup regularly. My guess, Alex, they don't want Perunovich playing with Matt Kessel. And they want Justin Falk to be on that right side. They want Scott Perunovich to be on that right side. So that made the decision easy for them. Mm-hmm. The other thing that maybe goes into this, I wonder if they believe that Matt Kessel was getting overexposed. He has been a negative on the ice in 5 of his last 9 games. Now, only one of those was a -2 or worse, and that was the most recent performance in which he was a -3. If you look at some of the underlying numbers, they've been kind of touch and go, but that's been the case for the entire team at 5-on-5 so far this season. Alex, I know you were very frustrated by this news. What did you make of them sending Matt Kessel down in the corresponding move to activate Justin Falk?
Again, it makes sense. I understand why they did this because he along with Bolduc and Neighbors are the only guys that are waiver exempt. So other than you're not sending Neighbors down, and of course after 2 games you want to keep Bolduc up here. So you go back to a Matt Kessel. My problem with that, and I do agree with your theory there, BK, that maybe he was starting to get overexposed and you had to send him back down so he didn't lose his confidence. But I just, in terms of asset management, yeah, in terms of roster asset management, that's great. But in terms of development, I would much rather have a Matt Kessel continuing his development at the NHL level, even if he has been looking overexposed, than going back to the AHL, playing top minutes where he's played over 100 games already. You know who he is. And now you've got to worry about, your last few games didn't look good, so now you got to go back and regain your confidence. That's not an easy thing to do. And yes, you don't want Scott Perunovich out of the lineup. You need to figure out who Scott Perunovich is. You don't want to sit Marco Scandella because Perunovich has gotten comfortable on the right side. All of it I understand. But you're going to have to figure it out at the NHL level. What happens if Scott Perunovich plays well down the stretch and you've got Falk, Krug, Leddy, Parayko, and Kessel deserves to be in your top 6. Kessel has played, regardless of what he's looked these last couple of games, he deserves to be in your top 6. You're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to tell Scott Perunovich, hey, we need you on the left side. I know you're comfortable on the right. We need you on the left side. Maybe all this changes by the trade deadline if Marco Scandella or somebody else gets moved. My other issue with this is I get the roster and asset management. But Tyler Tucker, who would have to go through waivers, Tyler Tucker, the last game that Tyler Tucker has played for the St. Louis Blues is what, back in January? January 30th was when he played against the Columbus Blue Jackets. He has played 1 game in over 2 months.
Well, that's his role.
Understandable.
He's an 8th defenseman. Do you want Matt Kessel in that role?
No, but...
Because that's your option. This is kind of going back to the conversation that we had during the regular season for the Cardinals, where it was somebody's got to be in the Taylor Mata role. Somebody's got to be on the bench and not play. And that is, for the Blues, what Tyler Tucker's responsibility is right now. So if you had kept Matt Kessel up, and I told you he's with the roster, they decided to waive Sammy Blais, but they're not keeping him in the lineup. He's not playing for the next, let's call it 2 weeks while we're heading into this trade deadline. How do you feel about that? Is that more valuable, or is it more valuable for him to go down to the AHL and play every night?
I think
because the results ends up basically being the same.
I think it's valuable keeping him at the NHL level. So
even if he's in the press box every night.
Because he's around the NHL players. He's working with the NHL coaches. He's training with these guys on and off the ice. But it wouldn't happen in my scenario there. He would be playing, maybe not every single night, but he would be flipping spots with Marco Scandella. Marco Scandella would come in and out of the lineup.
But now do you want to have Perunovic and Kessel in the lineup together? You've got to have those guys with veterans.
Kessel and Krug and Falk and Perunovic. And I tell Perunovic, look, it's great you feel comfortable on the right side, but you're going to have to be a left-handed defenseman for us. And I mean, but even beyond that, let's go down the path there. But you've got two forwards that aren't playing. Sammy Blais and Nikita Alexandrov. And I understand you keep one of them because if injury pops up, you want these guys available to you. My whole issue with this is I deem it more valuable to have a 23-year-old defenseman who has played well for you, even if 2 games have looked bad, has played well for you in the absence of Justin Falk. I want to keep developing that at the NHL level rather than send it back to the AHL and say, go back and do what you've been doing. Keep developing at the NHL level, because that, to me, is asset management in terms of, hey, he might be in my top 4 next year. For how well he played, he could be a top 4 defenseman for me next year. How are you going to gain any more traction on a playoff push at the NHL level while you go back to the American Hockey League?
Yeah, I think that's a more than reasonable way to look at it. And really what you're saying is, hey, Matt Kessel should be the pairing partner for Torrey Krug.
Absolutely.
Period. And like, if that's the starting point of the discussion, it changes everything else about what we're talking about. Because then the flow chart is, okay, if Kessel is the guy that you're pigeonholing, you're placing in that top 4 role, well, then now Justin Falk naturally bumps down to the 3rd pair defensively. And that means Scott Perunovic, because he is the priority over Marco Scandella, would bump over to the left side, despite him maybe being more comfortable on the right side. And now Scandella is the one that ends up being out of the lineup for the next 2 weeks. Here's the problem. If you're Doug Armstrong and you potentially want to trade Marco Scandella at the trade deadline, I need to keep Marco Scandella in the lineup as well.
Yeah, and in a week and a half, if Marco Scandella gets moved by March 8th, this is a moot point because Kessel's coming right back up here and you're putting him right back into the lineup and playing down the stretch. So, again, this could all change in a matter of a week. I'm just giving the initial thought process right now of a 23-year-old who played well in the top 4. It's tough after a bad game, which he'd even tell you he was not good.
He is bad, yeah.
To say, go back to the minors because in his mind, I got to put myself in a 23-year-old situation. I played like crap that game, and now I'm getting demoted.
I don't want to overread into anything, but it does make me wonder if the Blues are starting to turn the page into seller mode at the deadline. Again, this is a tinfoil BK theory here. If you're sending him down, the reason why you do that is to continue playing guys that you want to potentially feature heading into the trade deadline. And the prime example of that would be Marco Scandella. I also wonder if they're featuring Justin Falk. Like, if we're trying to show, hey, Justin Falk's back, he's healthy, he's good to go. If you're interested in Justin Falk, now's your time to come get him, ladies and gentlemen. There are not a lot of other defensemen, especially with term, that are available out there at this year's trade deadline. There's a couple, but there's going to be a lot of teams that are looking for top 4 defensemen. And in his career, Justin Falk has proven to be more than capable of being one of those guys. I wonder if that could be something that's happening here as well. There's a lot that is happening right now within the Blues that is going into their thought process that we're not aware of. Sometimes the simplest answer is the best one, and that is they think Matt Kessel has been a bit overexposed. Going to send him back down to the AHL while we continue to get opportunities for Scott Perunovic and Marco Scandella. I think that's really what went into this decision, and he's got a 2-way contract, so it's easy to send it through waivers. He's going to be back up after the trade deadline, I bet you.
I do really wonder if this is the team kind of saying, like, yeah, we're about to go into sell mode a little bit.
Yeah. I think that,
especially with the stretch of games that are still coming up, and look,
because you can't put a forward through waivers and potentially lose him if you're going to start selling off assets here pretty soon,
you're going to need those guys up here.
Forwards are potentially going to be on the market. You're going to need somebody as filler that can get back into your lineup down the stretch.
But which, again, like if I'll play devil's advocate on the other side, I'd much rather have 5 more games of Matt Kessel playing at the NHL when he's going to have to be in the lineup for the rest of the season than go to the AHL and play 3 games and then come back up here.
Well, and I just hope when we talk a lot about, players losing their confidence, becoming hesitant and gripping the stick too tight, I hope that doesn't happen to Matthew Kessel now, because he did play well for the majority of his time up here. And I hope a send down to the AHL doesn't stunt his confidence. And then, when he does come back up, he's playing to not make a mistake, because he could get into trouble doing that.
And if it does, though, I mean, that's on the player also. Like, you got to have the mental strength to be able to fight through that. And Matt Kessel seems like a guy that's pretty low key, kind of, it doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. So I don't expect it to affect him, but it's just in terms of, we talk asset management on roster spaces, and I agree, but there's also an asset management of players and development, and that's where I would have liked to see him stay at the NHL level.
This second wild card spot in the West is going to be so bad. Everybody's trying to get out of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, Nashville has won 5 in a row and is now 4 points ahead of the Blues, and also might trade their goaltender. That's put them in this position.
Yeah, we know the Blues situation. The Wild have not been in a good spot lately. Calgary is selling everything. The Arizona Coyotes have lost 12 straight. It's a disaster. Everybody that was competing for this second wild card spot in the West, and that's not to mention the LA Kings, who got off to that unbelievable start to the season, and then were so bad in the month of January and February that they fired their head coach. So, everybody in this wild card situation, the top 6 in the West is really good this season. Mm-hmm. The rest of it is an atrocity.
And the crazy thing
it's awful.
The crazy thing is I can still see Jordan Bennington beating the Vancouver Canucks.
Or the Colorado Avalanche or the Dallas Stars.
I could still see it.
Yeah. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
All right, coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for in or out. Guys, there is a little bit of news to pass along for the NFL as well.
Man, we are on fire.
Just tweeted out the Raiders will attempt to re-sign Josh Jacobs, but they are not expected to place the franchise tag on him. It would have cost them $14 million. So Josh Jacobs, Raiders running back, is expected to hit the free agent.
Same with Saquon Barkley, Schefter just tweeted. So they're not they're not franchise tagging him. They're going to explore a deal to re-sign him, but they're not tagging him.
Wow. So 2 really good running backs on the free agent market to go along with Derrick Henry and Austin Eckler. This is about as star-studded of a running back market as you could have possibly expected. Coming up next, in or out, here on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Brandon Kiley for our friends over at Circa Sports Illinois. This is sports betting the way that it was supposed to be. They are the largest sports book out in Las Vegas, and now they have it available for you at your fingertips in the state of Illinois. You gotta download the Circa Sports app today. It's the one with the Illinois side of things on it for you. Alex, we are just a couple of weeks away at this point from the start of March, and you know what that means. It's college basketball season, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you want to get your bets in over there for the conference tournaments or the big tournament, it's all available for you on the Circa Sports app in Illinois.
And that means I'm putting together a 64-leg parlay for the first round, which means I'm bringing in the most money possible, because at Circa Sportsbook, they are not limiting players based off of their winnings. Everybody has the same limits, unlike other sportsbook. They want you to go check out other sportsbook apps because they know you'll be right back with Circa Sports Illinois. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Blues game over the weekend got out of hand fast. A 6-1 loss to the Red Wings up in Detroit as the Red Wings sweep the season series with the Blues. And today the Blues sent down Matthew Kessel as the corresponding move to Justin Falk being activated off of injured reserve. And he will be in the lineup likely tomorrow as the Blues are in Winnipeg to take on the Jets. Pregame will be at 6 o'clock. Puck drop at 7 here on your home for the Blues, 101 ESPN. And then for St. Louis City SC over the weekend, they played to a draw with Real Salt Lake in the first match of the regular season in the MLS. They'll be back in action tomorrow as they take on Houston in the next leg of the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff. Find new roads and shop 24/7 at londoff.com and londoffautoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for in or out. You give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are in or out here on BK and Ferrario. Alex, the news is coming in hot and heavy. Running backs not valued across the NFL.
Who said that before?
Yeah, I don't know. Suddenly the teams are starting to wisen up, but I actually think they're going maybe too far in the other direction here. There's a lot of really good running backs that are about to hit the market. According to Adam Schefter, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler, all expected to hit the free agency market. None of their teams are expected to use the franchise tag on them. Alex, in or out, none of those guys get $30 million or more via free agency.
Oh, in. And you're going to see a ton of dudes get like 1-year contracts that are like prove-it deals, kind of like what Zeke's was. Maybe not as low as Zeke's this past offseason with the Patriots, but I think the most you'll see for one of these running backs is going to be like $15 million or something like that. And honestly, if I'm Houston, if I'm Baltimore, if I'm Buffalo, if I'm Kansas City, I am swooping in on this like a vulture with a dead animal, because they're all standing there for me.
There are now 5 running backs remaining in the NFL with a contract that exists with a value of at least $25 million. Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor, and Nick Chubb. Those are the only 5 running backs in the league right now with that kind of a contract. I think you could see a $10 to $12 million average annual value, but I don't think any of it is going to get to 3+ years. I think you're going to see 1 or 2 year deals for these guys. Do you have a favorite fit for one of these running backs? Henry, Jacobs, Saquon, Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler. Do you have a fit that you like the most?
It's Henry with Baltimore, or I would say Jacobs or Saquon with the Houston Texans. Houston is my like self-proclaimed team this season. They've got to get one of these running backs, not named Tony Pollard. Don't go get Tony Pollard, Houston, but get one of these top guys.
I think Derrick Henry would be a perfect fit for Buffalo.
Yeah,
his style of play in the cold and
2 rugged guys,
the playoffs.
And Allen and Henry, you don't know who's going to run at you.
That is what Buffalo has been missing.
Well, that and talent from their quarterback in the playoffs.
Sure. Fair.
I promise you I'm not trying to be a homer. You guys took the ones that I think are really good. Like Buffalo and Baltimore both make a ton of sense to add a big-time running back this offseason. I'll give you 2 others. I think Cincinnati adding one of these players would be a really good fit. I think there's a decent chance that they end up cutting Joe Mixon this offseason as well. There's a lot of talk about that last offseason. So Mixon might be another guy that ends up becoming available. The other one would be Kansas City maybe going out there and getting Austin Eckler. You saw how important Jerick McKinnon was to them in the postseason. He has so many injuries. He's getting up. I think that was his last game. I don't think he's going to play anymore in the NFL. Austin Eckler does a lot of the things that Jerick McKinnon did for them. They need a pass-catching back that can go out there, be really good for them, take some of the load off of Isaiah Pacheco in the regular season. I think that could be a really good 1-2 punch for Kansas City as well.
Can I give you another tinfoil?
Go ahead.
We saw the reports of Peter King saying he's not sure if Chicago is going to trade or keep
I'll go ahead and give you the exact phrasing from him. Peter King earlier today, who's one of the most tight-end reporters in the NFL. By the way, he announced earlier today that he's going to be retiring from reporting. So congratulations on an unbelievable career for Peter King. Said, quote, "I suppose the Bears are going to trade the top pick." He then couches it, "I know nothing, but that seems to be the way the wind is blowing. What I say is that the Bears could keep Justin Fields, and in his opinion should, and then trade the first pick down once or twice and build the kind of supporting cast that a team needs in order to contend."
Now my tinfoil. The Bears are looking at this and saying, we keep Justin Fields. We trade the first pick to get a 3rd, 4th overall pick and draft Marvin Harrison, draft another piece at 9th overall, get some good players throughout this draft, and sign one of these running backs. Marvin Harrison, DJ Moore, Justin Fields, let's say Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, any of those players, and then whatever else they put.
I would see Saquon there.
Yeah. I mean, you can't deny that as much as you want to reset the clock where you get a Caleb Williams, if you put that roster together tomorrow, Chicago Bears look like a much better team.
They do, but, man, if you're wrong...
Oh, it's awful. But how much of this with Justin Fields is we haven't put the right cast with him?
That's the question. That's the literal $100 million question.
Like Chase Claypool was not the guy that's going to get the best out of Justin Fields.
Absolutely, and he did a really good job last year. Like DJ Moore looked awesome with Justin Fields at the helm. Finished with almost 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns. Cole Kmet, really nice season. I think Darnell Mooney's a pretty good number 2 receiver. Didn't have a great season.
Now put a future A.J. Green on the field with those guys and get one of those running backs.
It is a fair question to ask of, are you making a mistake by trading away Justin Fields? I think Justin Fields is still good. I would trade for him if I'm the Falcons, if I'm the Steelers. I think he's an upgrade over what they have currently. But you're giving up the opportunity to draft Caleb Williams or Drake May, whichever way you want to go with this. Both of whom people believe have the chance to be legit top 5 quarterbacks in the league. I like Justin Fields. I would be shocked if at any point in his career he is considered to be a top 5 quarterback in the league. I think he's in that 10 to 15 range, which is good, but not great. You might end up drafting a guy that is the 25th best quarterback in the league, but you got to give yourself that opportunity. So for me, I think you're making a mistake by trading down and going away from one of these quarterbacks. I think you have to bite the bullet and try to go for greatness. And right now, you don't have that at the quarterback position. I found this to be really interesting, though. This is not a report that I expected to see. All right, what do you got?
All right, guys, in or out, the Ottawa Senators are the best trade partner for Doug Armstrong to reset this retool fast.
The Ottawa Senators, yes, in.
Doesn't have to be just Brady Tkachuk. I've brought up Shane Pinto's name. Jacob Chikrin could be moved. You could do a massive package, player for player, hockey trade in the offseason with Ottawa, and reset this retool to the point that you look at next season and say, yeah, that's a contending team.
Yeah, I'm in on this. I mean, I can't think of another team that is in full fire sale mode as much as the Ottawa Senators, and a team that you could go dollar in, dollar out with as much as them. So, yeah, I'd be in on this, and I think both teams would be interested in the other team's assets at this point. So I'm in.
Great. Do you have anything for us today for in or out?
So Zack Bolduc now with 2 games, in or out. He finishes the season up with the Blues.
In. Yeah.
I think by the trade, I think you're going to start to see the Blues try and make some deals to figure out what to do with Blais, with Kapanen, with Scandella, and post-trade deadline, you're looking at Bolduc, Jimmy Snuggerud, whenever his season ends, being in the top 9 by the end of the season.
Do you think Snuggerud and Bolduc ever get a chance to play with each other this season?
Not this season.
I wouldn't. I think you spread all 3 of those guys out. I think Neighbors moves up with Robert Thomas. I think you put a Bolduc, or you put Bolduc with a Kevin Hayes and a Snuggerud with Braden Shen, something like that.
Imagine the power play struggles a little bit. You have Snuggerud on one side, Bolduc on the other.
Oh, I mean, first of all, that's one-time shots on both sides of the ice. Snuggerud's the left side where Perron used to be. Bolduc's the other side. That's something you haven't had since Tarasenko and Perron were on the power play.
All right, a couple of things here quickly for in or out. Guys, in or out, Brady Tkachuk will be traded before the start of next season.
I got to say out. The Ottawa Senators are going to be the most disastrous organization in the National Hockey League if you trade Brady Tkachuk. It's $8 million, and I know he's not what Matthew is, but $8 million for a dude that is a pure leader for a team that absolutely needs leadership. I'm going to say out on this one, not to get people disappointed.
I can't imagine a team trading a player like that. And I know Ottawa's struggled, but I was saying...
I couldn't imagine Calgary trading his brother, though. So.
But they kind of had to.
Yeah.
Like, they were in a position where they had to. I don't think Ottawa has to trade Brady Tkachuk. I think they're in a position where they've been bad for so long that they're just looking at ways that they can just throw things at the wall and see if it sticks. And this is not something to do with Brady Tkachuk, because that player is a winning player. Like, you have plenty of players that are talented that aren't winning players. That's not Brady Tkachuk. So he's someone you build around, not someone you ship out to try to find the solution.
Totally agree, but this is the kind of team that is just cycling through any answer that could be out there. And right now, their last answer that remains on the chessboard is moving Jacob Chikrin and moving Brady Tkachuk. If you're trying to get a massive haul in return, well, the Chikrin thing has kind of run its course. I think you'll get something of significance in return, but not a game-changing, difference-making return, potentially.
Yeah.
Brady Tkachuk gets you that. Brady Tkachuk is the kind of player that you could trade and you get franchise-changing players back. Like Jordan Kyrou on the table for Brady Tkachuk. I don't think he's on the table if you're talking about Matt or Chikrin.
It's just weird because, like, this season, Ottawa has scored the 13th most goals in the National Hockey League. They've scored 20 more goals than the Blues had in 1 or 2 games less than the St. Louis Blues. I would imagine you're looking for more goal scoring, but I mean, you could go get whoever you want to be a goal scorer, but you need a leader.
You also need a goalie.
Yeah. Wow.
That's the truth. They don't have a goalie.
Yeah. Well, that could be another area that they call about.
Yeah. He's Alex. That's Grant. I'm BK. Coming up next, we're hitting the rewind here on 101 ESPN. Hey, if you missed anything from today's show, there was a lot to react to throughout the course of the day today. Check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com. The free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
You can always watch us on YouTube as well, youtube.com/101ESPNSTL. The studio cams are powered by the Air Alliance team. There's a great chat over there. It's called The Graveyard. Go on in, see what everybody's up to. A lot of activity, to say the least. All right, I'm going to ask you quick hitter style, Alex, to respond 30 seconds or less to a few of the biggest stories of the day.
Cool.
First one, top line once again coming under fire, specifically with Jordan Kyrou. Do you think you are now open, the Blues should be open to trading Jordan Kyrou?
Absolutely. I don't think you have a top line that can carry you out of this retool as fast as you need it to. I think it's time to look for another player that could play into your top six or your top line.
Totally agree with that. I have been the one that is very high on Jordan Kyrou. Some would just say very high, and now
also very true.
I have to be sober in my analysis of Jordan Kyrou.
Smart.
I don't think it's working, and if you're able to go out there and acquire somebody that is clearly better than him, you got to make that kind of a move. The shortstop situation for the Cardinals is something that appears to be coming to a head. They, I think, are admitting the truth, which is Tommy Edman might not be ready for opening day, and in such a scenario, you have to have something in place that is an insurance policy for Mason Wynn. There was a report earlier that they are looking at and have been tied to and might come to an agreement with Brandon Crawford, the former shortstop for the San Francisco Giants. Depending on where you look, he was either great or terrible defensively last year. No matter where you look, he was awful at the plate last season. Do you think it makes sense to bring in Brandon Crawford, Alex?
I don't, because you're clogging up another spot on your bench where he's not good at offense and he's not great defensively, but there's not a whole lot out there, and they love veteran leadership and, if I'm not mistaken, a good buddy of Nolan Arenado. So that seems like a double whammy right there for the Cardinals.
Same agency. I don't love that he's the choice. I would personally rather Elvis Andrus, but I do think that it is smart for them to go out there and acquire a veteran at the shortstop position. Final thing here, Bellinger, 3 years, $80 million with an opt-out after each of the first two seasons. There has been some speculation, including from Ken Rosenthal, that now that he signed such a deal, you could see something similar for both Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery. Do you think the Cardinals should or will be interested in those two markets?
Should, absolutely. Will, absolutely not. I think both players are going to go elsewhere because somebody's going to be crazy enough to give them a better deal than, and they don't want to be a Cardinal, apparently.
I would be interested in both of them. The Cardinals absolutely will not do either of those two contracts.
Smart.
He's Alex. That's Grant. I'm Brandon. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. Fastlane's coming up next.